fish tank or gold.
We are live on Twitch. Of course, YouTube is taking its sweet time, but there we go. The green light flashes, the flags go up, churning and burning. They yearn for the cup. So, I think this deserves as much an introduction as anything. We are here to talk about football. There's lots of different ways you could talk about football. You can, kick it with your feet. You can do it in Spanish. I mean, some people do that. The NFL, speaking of Spanish, is going to be broadcasting a game on tomorrow night. So, before we even dive into all the changes to the 2024 college football season, what do you feel about not only these games being broadcast on Peacock, but to be broadcasting a game on Peacock from Sao Paulo, Brazil, when Green Bay and Philadelphia take each other on Friday night?
I'm interested in the fact that they're going very expansive internationally. I'm interested to see how the crowds play. I always love watching the London crowds, like who really have no specific team, but when a team does something good, they cheer for it. I'm expecting a lot of that in Brazil. Um, I actually thought it was a little ridiculous that there was a whole controversy surrounding what the teams would be wearing for their jerseys. I thought that was incredibly stupid, but they have rules in place, so got to follow the rules. But I'm excited, man. It should be very interesting to see how things stack up overseas.
And, you know, I can't say this is the first time they've ventured out of the English language zone, so to speak, because they have done games in Mexico City. Of course, they did games from Germany last year. Germany, a lot more in the English language sphere than somewhere like Mexico, because, Germany with American military influence and the way Europe is interconnected, folks in Germany speak about as good English as we do, whereas, obviously our German is pretty lacking. But it's interesting to see him go to a place like Brazil, especially Sao Paulo. I mean, you think Sao Paulo is a kind of place where you see like these rock concerts with like tens or maybe hundreds of thousands of people kind of laid out, just excited as hell to see their favorite artist, give them an opportunity to be there. But what is a football crowd going to be like there? I mean, talk about football. Football there is a religion. I mean, they're
Yeah, for
crazy.
real.
Not to mention, I like that they sent Green Bay. Like green, yellow, like very much Brazilian colors. Philadelphia green. You know,
Mm-hmm.
kind of rocking a color scheme there. Where the Jets not able to make
Mm-hmm.
it for that game, and they're not on schedule to play Green Bay. Although the Jets Green Bay game, if and when that happens, would be marquee for other reasons. But I'm
Yeah.
not even familiar. Like, what is the Brazil jersey controversy?
Uh, so there was specific things where, like, I believe both teams were unable to wear the color green.
Oh,
Like, I didn't look fully into it, but I remember like it was something about like either the Eagles or the Packers or both were unable to use like a green colored
yeah. I see
jersey.
the Eagles are featuring a black, helmet and black everything else. So, you know,
Sorry, I'm trying to get some audio stuff here.
whereas I do see the Green Bay Packers
There
doing
we go.
doing the classic green and yellow. So I guess they are the home team. They're the baby face. They're in Brazil, rocking very Brazilian colors. In Philadelphia, now all black. Well, all
Yeah.
white and black, which is kind of interesting for them. But turning our attention to something a little different. Like I said, 2024 college football season, a lot of changes coming into it. I mean, you know, pour some out on the ground for the Pac 12 with only two schools remaining, Oregon State and Washington State, although they're not really in the Pac 12. I mean, they are the Pac 12. But either way, you think about all these conferences kind of absorbing different teams. I mean, you, as a Big Ten individual with UCLA, USC, Oregon, jumping into that fold, Washington as well, jumping into that fold, and then you look at Stanford as well as California going into the ACC makes no sense. I mean, from coast to coast, the Atlantic Coast Conference now has two teams sitting on the Pacific Coast. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, Clemson or Florida State, I should say, to California is the longest trip in the that could possibly happen in an ACC conference game. I mean, could you imagine a volleyball game or something? You're going to drive or not drive. I imagine they're flying, but I mean, even for those low tier sports, you're going to be spending thousands of dollars for them to go cross country to play Colorado from the Pac 12 back to the Big 12 where they left. That's going to be an awkward situation, too. You get out of that conference and, you kind of cut your way over to the Pac 12 into a completely different world, and then the Pac 12 falls apart and you got to go back with your hat in your hand.
Yeah, the whole splitting of the conference was very odd. At first, I was kind of like, this is going to be very like all over the place. This is going to be slipshodly put together. But after what I've seen so far at the beginning of this season, I'm not too upset about it. Like I enjoy seeing the fact that like teams that traditionally have had easier schedules or have had more so like an easy-ish schedule, but then they have maybe like two, three decent matchups. Like we're not seeing that so much. It seems like now we're seeing more competitive matchups just because we have those teams that have been in a set conference for so long with a set amount of teams are kind of having to readjust on the fly as opposed to we stick to the same old thing, we give a few variables and hope that works.
Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten's a prime example of that. I mean, a conference where it's so ridiculously top heavy. I mean, you go, Michigan, Ohio State sitting on top of the conference, Penn State right there underneath them, Wisconsin a hair underneath them, and then obviously Nebraska came into that conference at one time with intentions
Oh
of
yeah.
being a power, but they've long since lost that luster. But everybody else that's in that conference is kind of just relegated to their status. They were one time, Minnesota was a great football power that won national championships in the 40s and is now kind of a shell of anything that resembles that. Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Northwestern, the lower half of that conference is really just kind of window dressing. I mean, really the kind of schools that are there for either other sports or just kind of there to keep the academic ratings there. I mean, much like you look at the
Oh.
SEC, a Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's there
Oh yeah.
because a donor base and academics, and baseball. That's it. That's the only reason the SEC has any interest. That and the footprint. It's good to have the Nashville team there. But speaking of
Yeah.
SEC, I mean, you talk about conference changes. The thing that really kicked it off, going back to was it 3 years ago when Texas and Oklahoma out of nowhere basically announced that they're going to the SEC. That led to USC, UCLA 2 years ago announcing their move to the Big Ten, which was quickly followed by Oregon and Washington. And out of all of that, I still think the most odd thing that we encountered is Southern Methodist University going from the American Conference, SMU, the Mustangs. I mean, the one program in major college football that's ever got the death penalty, never recovered from the cheating scandals of the 1980s. And I say never recovered. I mean, in recent years, they've become a much stronger, organization. They finally kind of caught their stride again, and going to the ACC and the way that they're going to the ACC is the most interesting. I mean, I'm not sure how versed you are, but they signed a contract to go into the ACC, take no money from the ACC for the next 3 years, which means like basically these programs are paid out by the television from the conference, and the conference signs big multi-million, multi-billion-dollar television deal for the conference, and they split the money with their constituent schools. Well, SMU is declining to take any of the money. Their boosters are going to have to pay for everything for the football program basically for the next 3 years, but they're doing it happily to go from a lower tier conference to be, in the Power Four, which that's got to
Yeah.
be getting used to. The Power Four, we were the Power Five for so long, and now with the Pac 12 dissolved, I mean, again, I guess it still exists in name. Oregon State and Washington State are still in the Pac 12, but, you know,
It's more so geared towards being like a technicality at this point.
yeah, I think that they're mostly just carrying it on to kind of rub it in everybody else's face. But coming along with all the conference changes is obviously some pretty interesting rule changes. The first and foremost is the 2 minute warning. I mean, they don't call it a 2 minute warning. They refuse to adopt that terminology, considering it's an NFL thing, but they consider themselves a 2 minute timeout that happens at the 2 minute mark of the second and fourth quarter. So,
They should call it the hallelujah mark because like this is something I thought college football should have had for a long time. Like I know the discrepancies between the NCAA and the NFL, and there are plenty, but this is one where it's like, why not just have a nice little break? You can get the people into it as opposed to we used to get to the 2 minute mark and I'm sitting here like, all right, we got a little timeout. Nope, we got to run the clock. We're running into a 2 minute drill now. We're running into a minute drill now. Like, I appreciate the slowing down as opposed to just keeping it hectic, keeping it going.
see, I find beyond just that, the the things that I like that are different, it isn't the 2 minute warning. If it's a clock, it's I love in college football. First down stops the clock for a given time. I think that is something that gives it its own flavor, its own situation. I don't like the NFL's near constant running clock. Uh, if we're talking difference in rules, the pass interference rule, Lord knows I don't want them to go to the NFL spot foul. I like the limitation to a 15-yard penalty. I mean that makes
Yeah.
that penalty so much more onerous in the NFL, and I kind of like that tiering of the game. You can be a DB in college and be a great DB, and those pass interferences are only a -10 to you. But in the NFL, you start doing that, and it's a -50.
Oh, you are, yeah, you are well up shit's creek.
Yeah, I mean, you still may keep the touchdown off the board, and they may be happy for you, but it's a whole lot worse when you keep the touchdown off the board, and they only get a first down and 15 yards compared to the ball on like the 5 yard line or the 2 yard line if it's in the end zone. I think the next strangest rule change, or at least the strongest rule change, probably a better way to think of it, is the coach to player communications via helmet. It's something that's been in the NFL. It's even been in high school football in many municipalities or, you know, many leagues, I guess, and state by state. I mean, like Texas and California have had helmet communications in high school football for years, but the NCAA's always been fairly resistant to it. Now, you got one on each side of the ball. You got a defensive player that can have in helmet communications as well as a quarterback most of the time going to have in helmet communications on the offense. That way, the offensive coordinator that's up there is going to be able to tell them some different stuff as far as that they can't see. And it's turned off within 15 seconds of the play clock or when the ball snaps. So that's important to remember. But it is, it's going to add an extra layer to it as well as it's going to be able to make the game a little bit more complex on that side of things. You know, like being able to get complex play calls in. I mean, for the longest time, college football's been relegated to that system of hand signals or using those giant boards with the four blocks on them with all the different pictures on it. And you know,
Yeah.
certainly some interesting stuff we saw there for a while, but it definitely means that compared to the level of the NFL game, the play calls were pretty rudimentary.
Yeah, I do enjoy that. Like I'm much more of an NFL fan than I am a college fan, but there are certain things about college ball that like while I just talked about like I do enjoy kind of a more slowed down approach to the conclusion of the quarters. I do appreciate fast play. I do like when college teams implement the hurry up and they implement it very well for the most part, as opposed to like an NFL team. When you see an NFL team like running the hurry up, it doesn't feel like, at least in my opinion, it doesn't feel as satisfactory as watching like a college team just hurry up after hurry up after hurry up and it just keeps hitting, or hurry up, and then you have one bad play, so then they decide to go back into regular time. Like, I do appreciate when the college aspect is like, let's pick it up and let's get it going. But then again, like I said, I'm an NFL guy, so I do appreciate, a lot of the subtle, very small differences. But the big differences are like some I love, some I don't love, like you were talking about. There's some implementations I really wish they take from college, but at the same time, I'm okay with where the NFL is right now too. Except for the kicking thing that we just brought in. I don't know how I feel about this yet.
Yeah, I think that Thursday, Friday, and Sundays are going to have a lot of weight on how we end up actually feeling about the kickoff, because preseason certainly is what it is for us, and
Yeah,
it
but
was
what I
nice to see it in action, but it doesn't really mean anything until we start seeing them actually showing their hand at who's going to be back there returning the kicks,
yeah,
how are they going to execute it, who's going to make a mistake, how does that affect the game going forward.
like what I saw in the preseason, I really wasn't much of a fan of. I do like the fact that there's no like you have to, or you can call it, dead wherever you catch it. I like the fact that it's making kick returns happen. It's just the way it's making them happen. I don't think I really enjoy.
Well, I talked to a lot of different folks. Some folks are, former football coaches and things like that, and folks that I hear of with the more X and O experience, their opinions lean toward the way that they're setting this kick return up is going to favor a different style of kick returner versus the kick returners of the past. We're not going to see Devin Hester's necessarily be able to take advantage of this. It's not going to be your small, scatty guys that have huge speed. It's going to be maybe more of a big bruiser with, explosiveness to hit a hole. Like, this may favor a Derrick Henry because it's going to feel more like a traditional football play. So with how close everything is, it's going to be a lot more of like hitting a hole and then trying to burst to the end zone in a running back situation, less of like taking a screen pass for a touchdown that you would see with a kick return. Whereas you're
Mm.
favoring guys with huge 40 or low, I guess, 40 speeds with huge top end speed. Whereas now it's more about not necessarily top end speed, but just being able to get past everybody and then keep them in the rear view.
And also, as you mention it, I would like to do a special shout out to our previous NFL uh, Hall of Fame class. Yeah, I very much enjoyed who was brought in. You mentioned Devin Hester, rightfully so, brought into the Hall of Fame. I think he was one of the best all-time kick returners. What great wide receiver, honestly. As big a Lions fan as I am, probably one of my all-time like NFL players that I've ever seen play. Dude was amazing at his position.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased to see Dwight Freeney, Andre Johnson, guys that I was like
Yeah,
not
a
really
bunch of
necessarily
people.
thinking that we're going to make the NFL Hall of Fame. Patrick Willis.
Yeah, like not to dox our age, but honestly, there's a lot of people that we both kind of grew up watching and seeing what their career was to where we can actually now, like, instead of having to rely on old school film to know how good a player was, we can honestly just remember back to us watching it younger and be like, you know what, they did deserve this Hall of Fame award.
All I got to say is I feel like they were maybe a little late getting Mongo McMichael in there, but now the ball is in your court, WWE Hall of Fame. Though he was not a great wrestler, let's be honest. But
For sure.
the man's got ALS, and he's a better wrestler than Donald Trump was.
I'm pretty sure a wet cardboard box would be a better wrestler than Donald Trump was.
Oof, we are off to a rough start. All the Trump supporters just hopped out of the
Shots
stream.
fired.
Yeah. But turning our attention back to the main task at hand here, taking a look at games as they lay out Thursday. No real college games to speak of as far as in relevance to the way our pick'em is set up. Plus, we can at least point out that with the pick'em, no FCS games are going to be involved. No teams that are FCS involved. So, if a team is playing an FCS team, that game is not considered. But that being said, on Thursday night, we've been talking for some time. Baltimore at Kansas City to kick the season off.
And I mean, what a game to start the season. Like last year, we had Chiefs Lions, and I really think a lot more people thought the Chiefs are going to just come out and pop the Lions in the mouth. But of course, as we all know, this was one of the greatest Lions seasons of all time.
Yeah, coming
It
out
was
party for
it
it too.
was it was destiny for the Chiefs to lose to the Lions last year. I don't know how much I believe that destiny follows suit this year. I feel like I like the Chiefs in this one a little bit more than Baltimore. However, I do believe that Baltimore defense is going to show up and just at some points in the game just absolutely pop the Chiefs in the mouth.
Well, as we kind of take a look at this game, might as well delve into it. I mean, Ravens coming out of last season, they were the top dogs of the AFC in the regular season, 13-4. They were able to make a run into the playoffs, but unfortunately lost to the Chiefs in the championship game. They were able to beat the Texans after a bye week, 34-10. I mean, blew out a very hot Texans team, only to lose 10-17 to the Chiefs at home. As we're seeing from year over year, I mean, Odell Beckham's gone, Jadeveon Clowney's gone, J.K. Dobbins is gone, Gus Edwards is gone. But
The for sure, the Baltimore offense is very different from what it was.
Derrick Henry, I mean, a big, massive addition here. I mean, you talk about seeing both of their top rushers leave, only to be replaced by a guy that really, the only question is he still the Derrick Henry that we know? And that's been the question really for the last few years. I mean, ever since 2020, where he had that incredible season, Offensive Player of the Year.
Oh yeah.
We're just waiting on Derrick Henry to be a running back and hit his ceiling and then start to regress year over year. It's sad to say, but it really is the way that they treat it. But that being
Well,
said, I still think there's still meat on the bone with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was strong last
Oh,
year.
absolutely. He was plagued by, like, I believe a couple injuries later into the season, his last two seasons. But even so, still putting up ridiculous numbers. Like, I don't see that changing too much unless, like, I believe Baltimore's running three running backs as well as Jackson under center. It really depends on what kind of plays they're willing to call to make what kind of downs they need to make down. But I'm in agreement with you. I believe Derrick Henry's definitely going to have some juice this season.
Well, here's the interesting thing for me as well. You talk about Odell Beckham going. Odell, good, but he never really meshed into that system. What I'm interested to see is in the free agency, they were able to bring in a grizzled veteran in Nelson
Pretty
Aguilar.
good.
I mean, Nelson Aguilar has been a guy that we've
Now
seen
Zach and I are streaming.
over and over, have a decent career. He's never been a great player, truly great player, but Nelson Aguilar has
Uh,
been a serviceable veteran for years
I
and
agree.
years. It just comes down to the point where can he be that support guy? I mean, we know that Zay Flowers is going to be the crux of the receiving core, and they've got other guys that's got experience. Obviously, Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the league. But can Nelson Aguilar step in and have, an incredible year of production? He's 31. He's not too old to do it, but he definitely is going to have to do better than he's done in recent seasons.
Um, to that point, I would say I think he's as reliable as he's ever been. Take that with as many grains of salt as you need. I I think it's nice to see he's still going. Like he's another one of those that like you know him from so many different teams. His run with the Eagles was absolutely astounding at points in time. He was doing more production on that offense than most of the other receivers. But I do agree with you again. It's a question of can he produce getting older, as well as can he stay away from injuries because he's getting older.
So now onto the other side here because Baltimore we know is going to have a stout defense. Offense is really the question and not even a question of the skill but the consistency. Looking at Kansas City struggled on the offensive side of the ball last year. They really needed to make some changes to be able to be a competitive offensive team. They went out and made some additions. I mean, Marquise Brown certainly one to circle there. I'd say another big one is the question mark of Xavier Worthy, wide receiver out of Texas, first round pick. He was strong in college, certainly a interesting selection too because he's another attempt to probably fill that hole Tyreek Hill left, considering he currently holds a 40-yard dash record at the NFL Combine. And to top it all off, in the second round, they were able to snatch up Kingsley Suamatia, who is now going to be one of their starting tackles. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he's going to be on the left side, playing that key role in the anchor. So, they're looking to secure some things here. It seems like they've really sussed out who's going to be the running back, considering that McKinnon is gone. The other
I
running
believe
back,
Pacheco
Hilaire,
was announced to be the starter.
for sure. And it was through the season that he kind of solidified that role. And, Edwards Hilaire is on the injured reserve. McKinnon is gone. So he's not going to be sharing those carries around. We know what McCole Hardeman can do. We know what Rashee Rice can do. Obviously, there are question marks about what Rashee Rice's legal status will be. But from everything that's flowing, they're not going to do anything to him till the legal situation of it is taken care of. And his court case isn't until December. So, that would imply that Rashee Rice is going to be a reliable member on this team. And another big one is that you talk about the Lions, you talk about the Chiefs play year or on last year. You know, big feature of that game's Kelsey was out, and Kadarius Toney making drops. Well, they made a cut on Kadarius Toney coming out of the preseason, so he will not be a worry for them as they work their way into this season. So I'd say this is a true Titan kind of matchup here. You've got a rematch of the AFC Championship game. They're giving Kansas City 2.5 points at home, kick off the season. I mean, Kansas City didn't need 2.5 points or didn't worry about covering a 2.5 point spread when they beat them by 7 on the road at the end of the last season. As the season changes, as well as the change in momentum that you get from a new season, kind of both teams have an opportunity to come flat footed. Who do you think's got to cover here? Will Baltimore be able to, plus 2.5? Will they be able to take it, or do you think Kansas City minus 2.5 here at home?
I'm looking to say I believe Kansas City will pull the -2.5 here. I'm really thinking, like, especially as a Lions fan, I'm much happier having to play them at last season's opener as opposed to what would be this season's opener, just because Baltimore's defense is looking good, but it's the question of the offense as opposed to, I believe Kansas City's going to stay well rounded here and make things happen.
Yeah, 2.5 point spread. Basically saying that Kansas City's going to win by less than a field goal, and I say it's a real toss up. The NFL is constantly a toss up selection, but I will tell you this: the one thing that gives me confidence in that spread is that if Kansas City wins, it's not going to be by 1 or 2 points. It's going to be by
No.
a field goal or more, and if Baltimore wins, it's going to be by a field goal or more. I question a lot there. Kansas City's such a good defense. Baltimore's such a good defense. Kansas City's played Baltimore so many times. I feel like I trust Kansas City and Kansas City staff to make the necessary changes, to make the necessary adjustments to beat a Baltimore team better than I think that Baltimore can make the necessary adjustments to catch up to Kansas City. That's why I'm going to take Kansas City to cover the spread. Now, over under here, 46.5 points. You cut that in half. That's what, 23 to 24? You know, 28 to 21. I feel like it's a good over under, but I still would lean towards. I don't know. I mean, these are two teams that can really score, but these are two defenses that can really stifle a score.
I've been feeling the under on this one. I do believe this is going to be a crazy defensive game. And like I said, I believe Baltimore's definitely going to take their shots and land a few good hits onto the Kansas City offense. But even so, I think the offense of Kansas City will find those precious moments to squeak out those like vital scores. I just don't see either team really pushing past 24. And then, first game of the season, that we really have no idea what these offenses and defenses are going to pull out. But I definitely have been feeling the under on this one.
Well, moving on to our next game. 7 o'clock on Friday night, we've got an intra-conference, not intra-conference matchup here of Brigham Young University, newly into the Big 12. You talk about all these conference changes. I believe they're in their second year. Southern Methodist, as we mentioned before, their first year in the ACC. Big time point scorers. You got BYU, who beat Southern Illinois 41 to 13. That was just last week. And then you got SMU, who even played in week 0, beating Nevada 29 to 24, as well as beating Houston Christian 59 to 7. Currently, Vegas is given 10.5 points to BYU on the road in Dallas, Texas against SMU. 7 p.m. on ESPN2.
This is definitely a outing between two strong college teams. Like we
Offensive
already
teams.
knew, oh for sure. We already knew SMU definitely able to drive the ball, able to score, but BYU is. It seems like they're one of those, don't pay attention and you're gonna get hit kind of teams.
Yeah, BYU, strong, consistent. They've been able to scheme thus far. I mean, it's hard to really get a feel, I'd have to say, last week when I was making my first round of picks, it is hard to make college football picks blind. There's so much change year to year. One thing I am confident though is with Southern Methodist that they're going to score points. They are a point scoring team. They, regardless of who's been at the helm recently, when Sonny Dykes was there, they were a point scoring team. And even now, going into the ACC, thus far that they've shown this year, they are a point scoring team. They're going to spread the ball out, they're going to move the ball. They've had lots of talented wide receivers. And so long as that quarterback and Preston Stone can get the ball out and get it in the hands of the playmakers, they're going to be able to put points on the board. I don't know much about BYU's defense. I don't know much about either of these teams, but I can tell you what the numbers tell me. And thus far, ESPN Analytics are looking at a 78.7% chance that SMU takes the victory. With that being said, 10.5 points, that's a pretty heavy spread. They are on the road. It's that Friday night football. I kind of question it. My gut tells me SMU wins the game. My gut also tells me BYU plus 10.5 points. Probably a pretty good selection. I mean, given that they were able to stop SIU, hold them to 13 points, that's not a huge indication one way or the other, but it does tell me that their defense is at least competent. And it also tells me that Nevada, who SMU kind of struggled with, is not a great team. They beat Troy 28-26, but they're certainly not a team that I would hang my hat on as an offensive juggernaut. So BYU, I feel like could keep this thing close, especially with a 10.5 point spread. So I'm going to go BYU 10.5. But
I'm right there with you. I'm not super knowledgeable on either team here. I know from what I've seen the first couple weeks of the season, I think BYU will definitely be able to hit this spread. As far as the over under here, mm,
I'm going over.
that's
28 points
that's
apiece gets us to
mm,
56. Neither one of these teams has scored less than 28 in 3 outings combined. I mean, with BYU scoring 41 last week, SMU scoring 59, and then scoring 29 against Nevada in week 0. I got to feel that both of these teams are going to score points and score it in droves.
I could agree with
A
that.
28-28 gives us 56 points. I feel pretty good about the over here. Now, on to something we do know a lot about in a lot better form and fashion. Going in to take a look at Jordan Love and his company of the Green Bay Packers, going to meet Jalen Hurts and his band, the Philadelphia Eagles. 8:15 on Peacock in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We kind of mentioned a little bit about this game earlier, but not necessarily much that, that that you can really notice is changing for those Green Bay Packers. They haven't lost, guys that are going to make huge differences. I think the biggest one is the inclusion of Josh Jacobs coming in on offense, going to make that running back room look a lot different. And
Well,
course, Aaron Jones is now gone on the opposite end. He's filling that hole. But nothing's really sexy as far as the draft. I mean, they were able to get Javon Bullard, safety out of Georgia, in the second round. That could be something that we see pay dividends for him down the road. I don't know if he's going to be a difference maker starting or anything on that defensive side, but he is certainly somebody to keep an eye on. I mean, very highly rated recruit, very highly rated college player, but not the difference maker that's going to come in and make a difference this weekend. It's kind of funny that they get a Georgia Bulldog, considering the 2024 Philadelphia Eagles are almost exclusively built on former Georgia football players. But you talk about differences year over year. I think the Eagles are the team that I have the most question marks about. I mean, considering
Yeah,
Jason Kelsey's retirement and Fletcher Cox's retirement, this Eagle team is going to look a lot different than what we're used to.
I appreciate that we definitely have a juxtaposition here of how these two teams ended last season, where Green Bay started off so cold and just could not find their rhythm. But over that season, they were just piecing it together. And then those last, what, 6, 7 games, they looked outstanding. To the Eagles, who just came out the gate running, I believe they went to what, 7-0 before someone finally beat them.
Yeah, they
And oh my gosh, they were just everyone's favorite contender to go into the playoffs. And then those last 3 games were just, like you said, there's a lot of question marks. And that was for last season's team before the playoffs. Now, like you said, we had retirements, we've had shifting of players. Like the Eagles just look completely different from what they looked like last season. How do they start with this game? Me personally, I'm actually liking Green Bay for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. You talk about two teams coming in with completely different, and it goes deeper than that. I mean, when you turn the clock or turn the calendar back, even a year before that, the Green Bay Packers were not a playoff team previously. They lost to the Lions the last week in 2022 to miss the playoffs, and that's the year that the Philadelphia Eagles are just a few plays away from getting their second Super Bowl ring. So it is certainly two teams that seem to be, at least as a national narrative is going, moving in opposite directions. Because Green Bay, trust me, on a national narrative right now, they're getting a lot of love. Some folks, unfortunately, are throwing out that this may very well be your NFC dark horse champion, or well, it could very well be the NFC North division winner. And not that I want that to happen by any means at all, but it could be a reality that that's what we're looking at here. So, looking at this game, Green Bay technically on the road, but truly both teams on the road in a unique environment. I don't know enough about Sao Paulo off the top of my head. I don't think that there's any kind of what's the right way to say it, like elevation issues, like Mexico City, obviously, being so elevated, getting acclimated to that kind of environment can be a thing. I think that acclimation to time difference is going to be something because, if I'm not mistaken, Brazil's an hour earlier than East Coast time. For Green Bay being a central time zone team, that could be something depending on how long they're there to get used to it. But I'm sure the NFL's taken all the necessary steps to get them there probably in the last 4 or 5 days. But I can say this. I think that despite all of that, I don't really feel good one way or the other. But it's 2.5 point spread. They're giving the favor to Green Bay plus 2.5, implying that they think Philadelphia is going to win. I'd favor Green Bay on the spread there. I think this could very well be a close game. Green Bay's defense is something I have more questions about than Philadelphia's, but Philadelphia's defense or offense, I should say, I've got more questions. Honestly, they don't have DeAndre Swift. Saquon Barkley is a new piece that we don't really know what's going to be like. There's no Jason Kelsey, so we can't expect to have the same level of key protection, especially in the run game where centers are so vital at getting that first push. I mean, quarterback to center exchange, not a big deal because I don't really see Philadelphia go under center all that much, except for, obviously that play. I think the play is dead without a Jason Kelsey. I don't think we see them
Yeah.
doing that in any form or fashion. But I just I don't favor Green Bay by a lot, but I favor them enough that a 2.5 point spread makes me lean their direction. And here's the key: if Jalen Hurts, and I've heard this from multiple people, that Jalen Hurts, they think that the NFL defenses have Jalen Hurts figured out. That there's been enough time for him to be in the league, that they've got enough tape on him, that they know his tendencies to the point where they can kind of keep him under control. If Jalen Hurts can make the necessary adjustments, that's going to be the real question here. So, with that being said, I still lean Green Bay plus 2.5.
As far as the spread is concerned, I don't know where I'm leaning. Like it's an interesting matchup certainly, but this could be one way or the other for either team. However, as far as the over under, oh, I am absolutely sold on the over here. I believe while there are questions for both teams, I don't think the offenses will have any question. I believe we're definitely going to see both teams over 20 points. There could be questionably both teams over 30 points. It could also be dependent on how the Sao Paulo crowd plays along with the game, but I do believe the over here is a safe choice.
Yeah, and I'll say this in favor of the over. I want the over as far as a selection, but I know that the NFL wants the over as a reality. They just, whatever happens here, they want the over because they're trying to sell football on an international stage, and points are better than no points. If you are a fan of either team, you don't want to see the other team score. But in
Oh
Sao Paulo,
no.
Brazil, the NFL wants to see lots of
They
touchdowns.
want all the crowd excitement they can muster up from a crowd that's not going to be used to this sort of thing.
Exactly. And if defense is making a play, they want it to be a pick six. They want it to be
Oh yeah.
a strip sack, fumble recovery touchdown. They want to see defense get into the end zone because getting into the end zone and having that crowd explode is better for the NFL in the long run. So I do favor the over, especially, and I'm not implying that the NFL is shady, but I will say this: the NFL definitely tries to get what it wants.
They don't really care for either team, but hell, I want to see pick sixes and strip sacks. Like I think that's all of us for the most part.
Well, I mean, I clearly want one team to win over the other if we're going for there.
Oh, for sure. As a proud
Yeah, as a proud
Lions
Detroit
fan,
Lions fan, I would love
I
nothing more
don't
than to see
want
Philadelphia.
yeah, I don't want Green Bay to win anywhere in the world. But as far as who wins, I have no idea on this one. This could very well be an up in the air type game.
Well, a whole long way away from Sao Paulo, Brazil, onto our next game in what I believe to be in Evanston, Illinois. I know Northwestern is playing out of a new stadium this year, actually. They're playing out of, if I'm not mistaken, like a converted lacrosse field,
Yeah,
or
like move upstairs or anything while I'm doing this? I don't want to be interrupting you.
We've got Duke at Northwestern in another one of those interconference showdowns. This time the ACC at the Big Ten. Northwestern 1-0 right now. They were able to take out Miami of Ohio by a score of 13-6. What a crazy defensive game. And I mean, you talk about an interesting place to play. You got Sao Paulo in a soccer stadium. They're playing in a 13,000 seat lacrosse stadium with bleachers. But Duke plus 2.5, Northwestern minus 2.5. Don't really know one way or the other where I would lean on a game like this. But I can say this: it is an interesting matchup. I mean, not something that I had foreseen even being on the uh, on the table here. I was kind of unaware of this game coming in. They're leaning Northwestern 54.6%. You know, Duke, so many changes. Their quarterback is now playing at Notre Dame. Their coach is now playing at Texas A&M. So all the goodwill that Duke had earned last year from having such an incredible season and kind of closing things down with a bowl win and upsetting Clemson by kicking it all off. I really don't know what to expect here in a game like this, but I gotta say, plus 2.5, minus 2.5, it's really a real toss up here. It's another one of those games where the spread is close, but this one I actually do lean more toward this could be a close game. I don't feel good either way in this game, but I will say Northwestern is on a hot streak right now. They're moving in all the right direction. Duke, they won, but they won against Elon 26-3. I can't really say that I feel all that strong that Duke is going to be on the good side of things here. They're having to travel. They're going to be in a weird environment on the road. It's going to feel like playing an away game at a high school. I have to say that I think Northwestern, who's supposedly a pretty solid defense in the Big Ten, they had a scandal last year which saw the release of their coach. Their interim coach was able to step in after Pat Fitzgerald was fired and has really made an effort here. I think Northwestern is going to rally. I think they're going to be able to cover the 2.5 point spread. I got Northwestern. As for the over under of 38.5 points, that one I don't really know where to go with. Northwestern won their game by nothing. I mean, what was it, 13-6, and Duke scored 26 on Elon. I have to say, with Northwestern, a defensive team, and over under at 38.5, that is 19 points, 20 points a piece. I'm going to go with the under. In fact, I'm going to slam the under. I would almost even lean that the under would be one of my key picks this week, but that's floating right now. I'm not entirely sure one way or the other how I feel about that. But moving on to Saturday, we've got a full block of games here. Not a lot of action one way or the other. It's not exciting games, but it's games for sure. But certainly the most exciting game, big noon kickoff, is going to be in Ann Arbor. We've got number 3 Texas and defending national champions number 10 Michigan in Michigan, plus 6.5 points for the home team.
You hear me?
I can now. Can you hear me?
Okay, so I do have a mic on that says that. My bad. Uh, I had to go outside for a second. I apologize. But to the last matchup we were talking about, Duke and Northwestern, I did want to mention this. I do feel Northwestern is kind of going to be a sleeper team in the Big Ten next year. Um, I see them kind of landing a decent enough bowl game, so to the over under there, I have to completely agree with you. I see maybe an offset of points here, but I think Northwestern's going to hit that spread. As to Texas, Michigan, I'm looking at this being a Wolverines fan. This could be a make or break game for how the Wolverines season ends up. This is a strong Texas, and I am honestly not that upset at the fact they're saying we're the underdogs here.
Yeah, I mean,
But
all things point to
plain
that way. You think about what you guys have lost. I mean, J.J. McCarthy's gone, Jim Harbaugh's gone. Most of your weapons are now gone. It's certainly going to be a much different look. And to be honest, Michigan's offense struggled against Fresno State last week. Did not cover the spread.
I mean, while it wasn't a sexy game for betting purposes, coming out and at least winning felt good enough.
I uh I got to be honest with you, Texas, from where I stand, may be the favorite to win the national championship. They did not graduate very many folks. Xavier Worthy certainly being one, but they replaced him in a very competent Isaiah Bond. And I kind of question whether Michigan can keep up with Texas offensively, where Texas may not have the best defense compared to a team like Michigan that is very, very strong defensively. But I think Texas offense, maybe more than Michigan's draft depleted defense, can handle. I gotta say, -6.5. I still like Texas on the spread, even in the big house.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do believe this is a case of Michigan probably suffering the first loss on the season. But ooh, I think I'd take Texas as well. I'm also going to lean probably. I think I'm probably going to lean on the over on this one.
Yeah,
I just there could be some explosive offensive plays.
I kinda agree. The over catches your eye. I mean, the original line on this game was 48 and a half. If this was 48 and a half, I'd be willing to take the under. But at 44 and a half, I mean, you're talking the difference of 24, 21 to 24 is enough to push the over. So I got to go the over. I mean, that's too low scoring. 48 kind of then gets you into 48 and a half is basically saying it'll be 21-28. That would be maybe a bridge too far with the quality of these defenses. But honestly, I could see an under happening if it goes one way or the other. If it ends up one sided, especially if it ends up one sided in Texas's favor because Texas's offense a little stronger and Michigan loses its momentum. But if Michigan is in this game, the over, over, over.
Oh, absolutely. And we could see, like I said, some very explosive offensive plays here. Uh, I hate to say it, but I think there could be some explosive Texas defensive plays as well. Just because, man, that backfield can be scary sometimes.
And you're talking about two teams that are kind of in just two different places as far as rebuilding as well. So, but I kind of go on to our next game here, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. This is a classic Big East matchup. Now you got two teams in two very different conferences. Cincinnati now in the Big 12, Pittsburgh in the ACC and has been for some time. It's going to be in Cincinnati on the river, and I don't really know what to expect here. I have not seen either of these teams kind of match up with each other yet, but I will say this. I mean, you look at Pittsburgh, they beat Kent State last week 55 to 24. I mean, big time score in there. And then Cincinnati last week was able to beat Towson 38 to 20. Over under will start there 59 and a half points. 30 and 30 would break it. Towson, though, played at Nippers Stadium, which is in Cincinnati. Towson, of course, an FCS school, not a powerhouse in the FCS either. They were 5-6 last year. I gotta think that Cincinnati, I don't really favor them in this situation, given that Pittsburgh was so explosive, and I can't really say one way or the other. I mean, this certainly could be, you know, taking the wrong angle on it because one good state game by Pittsburgh.
That does not solidify what they'll be all season long.
Not one
Which
bit.
I do. I gotta say, you can't sleep on Cincinnati. They've always, at least for the last decade, it seems like, have
Yeah,
been that
competent.
underdog, like undercover, like really, really strong team when they need to be.
I gotta say, Pittsburgh not make a bowl game last year. Neither did Cincinnati. Roster makeup certainly something that I have a question about more than anything. What did they lose to the portal? Who, what, when, where? I mean, as I'm looking at Pittsburgh's roster, you know, Pittsburgh roster from last year, we'll be able to see them shortly when we get to and I'm trying to remember who South Carolina will be playing this week. At Kentucky. That'll be interesting to see the SEC game kicking off. But neither here nor there. Pittsburgh lost a handful of players on defense to South Carolina. That's interesting. They were able to bring in some other guys through the transfer portal, including Eli Holstein, who was a transfer quarterback out of Alabama. Something that I would want to keep an eye on, considering he is the starting guy. Was able to tear it up last weekend. He was a pretty decently rated guy going in, so certainly could be a guy that could put offensive points on the board. As I'm taking a look over at Cincinnati at their roster, does seem like they had a lot of guys that transferred out. But that's just the reality of college football now. I mean, you're gonna see a lot of guys go in and out. I mean, Cleveland Browns were actually selected one of their players in the seventh round, defensive tackle Jawan Briggs. That's one thing that Pittsburgh didn't have as I was looking over their roster. Not a single draft pick for them last year. But, a lot of unknowns here. I guess I'm going to have to go with my gut. ESPN's giving 57% chance to Pittsburgh with a spread this low. And I got to go with Pittsburgh. Honestly, I feel pretty good about a plus 2.5 spread. They're giving them 2.5 points. Cincinnati at home. I think Pittsburgh can beat them by a field goal or more, but I think Pittsburgh probably beats them by a touchdown or more.
I think that's a pretty confident assessment here.
Now the over under 59.5 points. That's where I get kind of nervous. I mean, Cincinnati gave up 20 points to a not so good Towson team, but Pittsburgh gave up 24 points to a not so good Kent State team. Now, granted, they outscored Kent State by 30, and Cincinnati only outscored Towson by 18. And Kent State's a Division One school, and Towson's an FCS school that didn't even make the tournament last year. I would lean toward maybe Pittsburgh's defense being a hair better, but neither defense is all that impressive. So I'm going to go with points. I mean, when I look at stats for this year, Brian Sorsby, the quarterback for Cincinnati, 22 with 31 for 383 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, I'd take that in fantasy. So 59.5 points over. I think I'd go with the over here. I think they're going to score, and they're going to score a lot.
It definitely could be a case for both teams.
As for Kansas State, Tulane, we're looking at number 17, Kansas State, going into New Orleans, going into Yulman Stadium, more than likely. I got to be sure that this is going to be played in Yulman Stadium, maybe played in the Superdome. You know, Tulane, for big games, sometimes steps on over into the Superdome for a game. It also depends on whether or not the Saints are playing at home. But Kansas State only given 9.5 points to Tulane. I don't know much about Tulane this year. I mean, I'd like to think that they're as good as they've been, but they're coming in with a new coach, taking over as the coach from last year is already moved on. Willie Fritz is now the head coach at Houston. You know, taking over that program after very strong years at Tulane. Will they be able to carry on the success that they've had? No clue, but when I look at the transfer portal, when you have a coach leave, got a whole lot of guys that leave with him. And not to make a huge commentary on the state of college football, but SCLU, Southeastern Louisiana, which is an FCS school, but in their favor, Tulane beat them 52 to nothing to kick their season off last weekend. They got Kansas State coming in, number 17 Kansas State at that. They are a ranked team in the Big 12. And talk about a team that had players drafted. Kansas State put 3 in the draft. Ben Sinnott with the Washington Commanders, Cooper Beebe for the Dallas Cowboys, and Los Angeles Rams took KT Leviston. So, this is not a surprise. They beat another FCS school 41-6, UT Martin at home. If they're only giving Kansas State 9.5, man, that's tough. They're going to be on the road. They are a ranked team, but Tulane has been a ranked team these last 2 years. They've won a lot of games. They're still firing on a lot of different cylinders on offense. I don't know what to feel here, but I do know one thing. It's going to be a good game.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not particularly well versed on either team here. I see one's a ranked team, so obviously, I'm dumb to the NCAA, so I'm going to probably assume the ranked team's going to be taking most of this away.
Yeah, I feel good about the ranked team. The only thing I got a question is with the ranked team, they beat a team in FCS that went 3-8 last year. They beat them 52 to nothing. And Kansas State beat an FCS school that was in the playoffs and was 9-3. They beat them 42-17, if I'm not mistaken. And when you take that into account, it's kind of enough that you're like, I think Kansas State is going to be good enough to beat them. But will they beat them by 10 points? I'll say this. My gut leans toward Tulane with the additional 9.5 points to be able to keep it there. I think this is closer than the experts think. But not so out of whack that it's certainly not. I don't think Tulane wins, but I think they cover the spread. As for over under, neither team gave up points in any regard, but they both scored a lot. So with that being said, 49.5 point, that's 25-25. I think that I'm going to lean under there. I think that we'll probably see maybe a 30-20 game or a 30-24 game. don't think that we see a 31-24 maybe. I don't think that we get to the point that we break 50 points around.
I might agree with you there. There's definitely always the potential for a shootout in this kind of game. Uh, the over under set to damn near 50. I mean, it's a very close call there.
A matchup predictor currently given Kansas State 55.4% chance to win, Tulane 44.6. So very, very close. And Kansas State, just looking back at the end of last year, beat NC State in the bowl game 28-19, whereas Tulane lost 41-20 to Virginia Tech, a team that Tulane or a team that Kansas State or North Carolina State, I should say, would have beaten. So just playing off that information, I do feel more confident about Kansas State, but I don't really think that that adds a whole lot in one way or the other. That 10-point spread makes me question everything. But on to another really exciting matchup. You talk about two teams. If I'm not mistaken, both of these teams would have been old Southwestern Conference foes back in the day. We've got Arkansas at Oklahoma State in Stillwater. They're giving 7.5 points to Arkansas. Arkansas is 1-0 after beating Arkansas Pine Bluff. And Oklahoma State, a much better test for them. They're number 16. They're 1-0. And I don't even remember who they played right offhand, but I know that it was a much more competent team. It wasn't a directional school. I can tell you that. If I'm not mistaken, Oklahoma State played the defending FCS national champion South Dakota State. And, certainly not what you want to hang your hat on, but South Dakota State's the kind of school that would give most teams fear. They beat them 44-20. Arkansas was able to beat a much overmatched Arkansas Pine Bluff 70-0. I don't know what to say to this, but when you delve into these teams' records, Arkansas Pine Bluff was 2-9 last year, and South Dakota State was the reigning FCS national champion. They went 15-0. They put players into the NFL. They have a pretty talented roster overall. They're ranked number one in the FCS despite losing last week. 7.5 points, not a lot of points to give up. Basically saying, will they beat them by more than a touchdown? Heck, a 2-point conversion will do it. Arkansas's coming in. They've had a lot of transitions. They don't even have their starting quarterback from a year ago. I gotta say, Oklahoma State, they stumble sometimes early. That has been kind of a moniker of a Mike Gundy coach team, is that if you're going to lose early and then catch momentum. I mean, famously, when they've been on their tears to knock on the door for national relevance, most of the time it's losing to Iowa State, and that game was usually in September. I think that given they're playing an SEC team, Sam Pittman holding on to his job by the thinnest thread. This is a must-win situation for them as far as the year spent. But I don't know. I think Oklahoma State's more than they can match. The spread is a tough one. I tell you, Vegas knows what they're doing, but I'm gonna lean Oklahoma State 7.5, giving up 7.5. As for the over/under, I don't think Oklahoma State's a defensive team. I know Arkansas can score points. They did it last week at least. They've got the quarterback from Boise State now there. He was able to sling the rock for him pretty good on last weekend. I'm going to go Oklahoma State, and I'm going to really go over. I just think that the offense for these teams are going to really overmatch the defense for these teams.
I think I'm going to agree with you on the spread here. I do see Oklahoma just taking this, especially being a home game for them. For the spread or the over under, I think I'm going to disagree with you. I think this is going to be on the underside of it. I think this is going to be an incredibly defensive game where there's going to be a lot of stalemate third downs. I think we're going to see way more punts than we would have imagined, but I think I'd be taking the under on this one here.
On to our next game. The Syracuse Orangemen going to be hosting number 23 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Georgia Tech coming off of a pretty strong start to the season. They were able to beat Georgia State last week at home, but also were able to go to Dublin, Ireland and get the dub over formerly number 10 Florida State. Syracuse, not a traditionally strong football school by any means. I mean, they certainly had their run at a time. Jim Brown famously played there. Ernie Ball, first African American to win a Heisman, came afterwards. But since then, Syracuse much more known for being a spoiler than ever being real competitive. Georgia Tech now ranked at 23rd, but they are ESPN matchup predictor giving 62.4% chance to Georgia Tech. You look at a previous matchup, Syracuse was able to beat a formerly good Ohio team, Ohio, who was really competent last year. They beat them 38-22. But I gotta say, Georgia Tech's only given up 3.5 points here to a Syracuse team that's not traditionally known. Georgia Tech has put up points pretty decently, but I don't like this game. I certainly wouldn't make it one of my singular picks. I wouldn't bet the house on it by any means, but I like Georgia Tech minus 3.5 here against Syracuse.
This is for sure an odd matchup. Um, Again, I'm not super knowledgeable one way or the other to either of these teams. It's actually quite surprising to me. Georgia Tech is currently ranked, but I mean, from what you just went over, it seems they might have a pretty strong team. Uh, I think I'm going to agree with you here. The over under, boy, I mean, it's hard to say one way or the other. I know, like you said, Syracuse normally plays the spoiler, but I think even when they play the spoiler, it's not by like terribly high scores. They keep a team like very close and just wear them out.
Yeah, that's why I kind of, on the flip side here, I lean toward the under, but I don't know enough to feel confident with it either. I mean, 16.5 points, that's 30 apiece. Sure, Syracuse scored 38 last week, but we're also talking about Syracuse who went to a bowl game and lost 45-0 against South Florida. And last year in this matchup, Georgia Tech beat them 31-22, and when you look at that in terms of the over under that doesn't get here, maybe Syracuse is better. Maybe Georgia Tech, of course, seems better than last year. I just I don't know enough to really feel confident here. I liked what I saw from Haynes King in the Florida State game. I'm leaning Georgia Tech, especially because I don't think, as far as Syracuse's schedule goes, talk about them playing the spoiler. I don't think this is the game they get up for. I think in the ACC, Syracuse is going to get up for NC State, or they're going to get up for Miami at the end of the year. I don't think that they're excited early season for Georgia Tech. Not the way that they were for Clemson in previous years.
I could agree with that.
Continuing on down the list here, all sorts of games going on. Another one that catches eye here on the list. You got Bowling Green on the Big Ten Network going to college. No, college. Gosh, I was about to say College Station. I can never remember exactly what they call themselves in University Park. That's right. I knew it was named as if it was. It's basically just the college town, but Penn State University. And Bowling Green plus 34.5 points coming into Penn State. Vegas is really making this one hard. Bowling Green, of course, beat Fordham last week, 41-17. Fordham, an FCS school. Not a lot to go on here. I would say if
No,
I
I. This is a lock. This is a lock and a half. Like, if you're picking Bowling Green for anything on this, you might want to check yourself in. Like,
well,
something's not.
I know Penn State's going to win. I don't have it down to that, but to cover a 34.5 spread, that's they're going to beat them by 5 touchdowns.
I, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised.
Looking back to last week, West Virginia beat or Penn State beat West Virginia 34-12. That would have been good. Did they cover the spread on that? What was the spread originally on that game? They were able to cover the spread by beating West Virginia. It was a 7.5 point spread. They beat it, of course, by 22 points. I gotta, I gotta, I gotta say, if I were in your shoes and you're looking at it, you look at Penn State's offense. Quarterback was 11-17 for 3 touchdowns. Running back 13 carries for 114 yards. I would just caution, you know, unless you really got to make this pick, I probably wouldn't make it. This
Yeah.
the spread is too big to worry about the spread. As for the over under 48.5 points, Bowling Green scored. Gosh, I gotta turn my clock back here. Bowling Green scored 41 points last week against an FCS school. They gave up 17. I think Bowling Green's defense is definitely going to be outmatched. I mean, you look at matchup predictor, 97.6% in favor of Penn State. I think Penn State's going to put up a lot of points on Bowling Green, but I think Bowling Green's going to put up more points than we expect. I think if you do pick the spread, Bowling Green plus 34.5, maybe a better pick than you realize. But then again, they only gave up 12 points to West Virginia. West Virginia is thought to be a pretty solid team coming in this year. I I want to go over though. 48.5 points, 24-24. I could see a world where this is a 35-10, 35-17 game, but I could also see a world where this is a 38-20 game, or a
Yeah,
42 or 49 to, because I don't think Bowling Green's defense is going to stop this offense. But I
I
would kind of caution against picking any of these one way or the other.
I do feel more confident in the over in this matchup, but yeah, I agree.
Especially if you're in a pick'em league where I'm in, where it's 12 picks. If you're in a 12 pick pick'em league, there's so much NFL football, so much football this week. This is not a game that I would feel very confident about. Speaking of games not to feel confident about, Akron 0-1, Rutgers 1-0. Talk about two teams that are odd to match up against. Akron out of the MAC, Rutgers, as weird as it is to say, out of the Big Ten in New Jersey. Akron plus 22.5 points. Akron absolutely decimated last week by Ohio State. You know, maybe looking to bounce back against a team that Ohio State plays later in the year. I don't really know what I would make of this game, but I do know enough to know that Akron did not do good at all against an FBS opponent. They gave up 52 points, they scored 6. And Rutgers against Howard and HBCU in the FCS put up 44 points. I got to think that even with a 22.5 point spread, Rutgers may be able to cover the spread. I would lean toward Rutgers at home doing it, but I wouldn't feel very confident about it either. I feel more confident about it than Penn State Bowling Green, but I feel less confident about it than Georgia Tech Syracuse even.
yeah, this is. Ooh, it's probably one of the more unsexy matches of
Yeah,
this week.
it's a
Like
reason why it's on the Big Ten Network.
I honestly think you're okay taking Akron for the spread here. I don't know if Rutgers will win by such a large increment, but the over under, I have no idea.
Yeah, 38 and a half points. No, 40 and a half points. Ugh, I have no idea. But I do know that it would be a lot easier to just move on to Troy, Memphis. Memphis hosting Troy. It's going to be on ESPNU. Memphis, kind of sight unseen for me this year. I haven't seen any of their action thus far. Troy had a very solid year, but Memphis, of course, beat North Alabama as I'm looking here, 40 to nothing last week.
Did you get the new calendar yet?
Nevada beat Troy last week.
We'll see.
Kind of a surprise.
You got an open crystal.
So looking at a Troy Memphis matchup, if Troy is getting 17 and a half points, I kind of favor Troy in that matchup. I mean, don't get me wrong, Memphis has a strong team. A 61.7% a matchup predictor here that really does favor a Memphis victory. They put up 40 points on North Alabama, but I tell you one thing, North Alabama is not Troy. Troy is a much more solid program from Alabama than North Alabama. In fact, Troy probably stole half of North Alabama's team in the transfer portal, and at least all the good players. So that would kind of lead me to think that Troy with 17 and a half points, especially if the matchup predictor is that close as far as a straight up victory, that Troy covering the spread could be pretty good. Over under, I don't even know, man. That's tough to say. If Troy lost 28 to 26, they scored on Nevada, but and Memphis scored on North Alabama, but neither team really has me feeling confident that they'll score 28 points apiece. I would kind of punt on that one. On to an Army Florida Atlantic matchup on CBS Sports Network. Of course, CBS Sports Network coming famous for being able to watch some Armed Forces game. I like Army. I was impressed with what I saw with Army last week. I watched them on a Friday night game. You know, as surprising as that to say out loud, I really like what I saw with the way that they were moving the ball. They've kind of gotten a little bit more back to their roots. They're going to be playing in the American Conference this year. Florida Atlantic, of course, very close to Michigan State. Kind of something to keep an eye on. Florida Atlantic, not a bad team at all. I really don't know which way I lean here, but I do know one thing is that they're given Army 3.5 points. The matchup leans heavily Florida Atlantic, given this is a home game. They're looking to bounce back. But FAU is on a heavy losing streak right now. I mean, they're looking to bounce back in more ways than one. I just need more information here, so I'm just gonna check. See what I can surmise here. Only thing I can guess is that Florida Atlantic. Well, Tom Herman's now the head coach at Florida Atlantic. Tom Herman famously left Ohio State and then took over Houston, left Houston and became the head coach at Texas. Took Texas to some pretty sizable bowl games, but was let go because he couldn't get them over the hump. And since Steve Sarkisian has kind of taken over there, so looking at what they've got here at FAU, they didn't really load up in the transfer portal. Cam Fancher, former quarterback for the Marshall Thunder and Herd, is now the starting quarterback at Florida Atlantic. He's got a 48% passing completion percentage. There we go. from last week against Michigan State. Did not look good, though they did stay competitive. That's interesting that they played Michigan State so close, but Michigan State's not a great team. Army, I'm going to take plus 3.5. I think that Florida Atlantic, as much as they've been in the dumps, they're going to continue to be in the dumps because Army's going to play disciplined. They're going to control the ball. They're going to eat a lot of clock up. And that option attack is always tough to stop. As for the over under, I don't really know which way to go there. I mean, 21-21 is about where they're looking at the spread. I think that I would probably lean toward the under more than anything. Again, Army's going to play ball control. If they're going to be in control of this game, they're going to be glad to win 24-10. That's the kind of game that they like to hang their hat on. Moving on to the next game, we've got ACC versus SEC matchup. As weird as it is to say out loud on ESPN2, out in the plains of Auburn, they're going to be hosting California, the Golden Bears, plus 13.5 points to California. I don't really know what to expect from California. You know, UC Davis is who they played last week on the ACC network. Gosh, for 31-13, the victory that they took over UC Davis FCS school. Not a great FCS school. They didn't even make the tournament last year. They're 7-4 in their conference. I don't really know what to surmise there. Auburn's supposed to be a better team this year than they were in years past. 13.5 points, 2 touchdowns. You know, looking at what I've seen here from Auburn thus far, Hugh Freeze has really made an attempt to load up on talent. They're supposed to be a lot better coming in this year than they were last year. It certainly showed when they took on Alabama A&M, who was not a playoff team either in the FCS. But you know, when you look at the difference of a 31-13 to a 73-3, I'd lean that Auburn is going to take control of this game. They've got the talent, they got the momentum, they got home field advantage, they got a 3:30 game on ESPN2. I'd pick an Auburn to cover the spread at 13.5 points.
Yeah, I think Auburn's an easy take here. That should be pretty much a lock in.
As for the over under 53.5, I mean, you're looking at a 28-24 kind of areas where they're predicting this to fall. I think Auburn is going to put up points. I don't know what California is going to do. I think that I would lean toward the under on that. I think Auburn with a Hugh Freeze offense wants to get the ball in the hands of their playmakers and put it in the end zone. But I also think that their defense is going to be stifling for a California team that may be a little jet lagged coming into the plains. And just a lot to ask here for them to put up points, but I think it's even more to ask. I mean, start moving those numbers around. I mean, you know, 42-10, 45-10, 35-20. I don't see where you get to 53.5 points or higher in this game, so I would lean toward the under. Jacksonville State Gamecocks, they lost a whole lot of talent. They're going to be hosted by Louisville, 3:30 p.m. Don't even know where this game's going to be televised. That's interesting to see that a top 25 team not getting a televised game. Not sure what's up with that. It's going to be on the ACC Network Plus. Jacksonville State, you know, solid team last year, but they lost to Coastal Carolina in pretty dramatic fashion to kick the season off. I would say that I like Louisville's chances to win for sure, but 27.5 points is a massive spread. I actually don't even think that they'll beat Jacksonville State by as much as Jacksonville State got beat by Coastal, because I think that team's got some talent on it. I definitely saw them play that game. That was a game that I had picked last week on the over. I lean towards the over again, 58.5 points. I think we're going to see a lot of scoring. Jacksonville State can score in a hurry. I saw that last week. But I also think that they're going to turn the ball over a few times here, and I think Louisville's going to make them pay. So, 27 and a half points is a huge spread, though. I mean, truly, I don't think that, 27 to 55 was enough to cover that spread, but just barely, right? Yeah, 28 points. So, that being said, I would avoid the spread on that one. The over under, I would probably lean toward the over just given the way Jacksonville State plays fast and loose with the ball, but it really comes down to the way Louisville plays. If they're going to play ball control, and that's what I'm going to take a look at here. 62 to nothing against Austin Peay. Austin Peay actually was a pretty sizable tournament contender last year in the FCS. I'm going to lean toward this being a high scoring game. I'd kind of go with the over here on this 3:30 game. Speaking of 3:30 games on the Big Ten Network, Washington, again, one of those weird things to say. Washington, just outside of Seattle, is going to be hosting Eastern Michigan for a Big Ten MAC matchup. Largest traveling distance probably ever in a Big Ten MAC matchup, if you really think about it. I mean, Eastern Michigan used to playing Michigan or Northwestern or Illinois in a MAC being hosted by the Big Ten matchup, but this time they're going to have to go all the way out into Washington, play them. It's 27 and a half points being given up by Washington. When the spread's that big, I kind of shy away unless it's unless it's Alabama taking on Western Kentucky. I don't really feel all that confident about a huge spread like that. Washington's had so much turnover. I mean, Jed Fish in his first year after leaving Arizona to take over Washington after Caden DeBoer stepping in for Nick Saban at Alabama. I think Washington's in a reload situation. I don't know much about Eastern Michigan. In fact, Eastern Michigan, of the directional Michigan schools, probably the school that I know the least on. So just kind of rushing our way through a lot of these. They beat UMass 28 to 14. I guess they're decently talented. Here's a real question: could you pronounce this town? Being a Michigander, it is Ypsilanti. Is that
Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti? Well, that is where
I've
Eastern Michigan is going to be from, going all the way to play Washington.
I've been to Ypsilanti a few times. Very cool town.
Well, I do think that they'll be going back to Ypsilanti a little disappointed with the way things played out. But
I would say so.
I don't think that if you're putting your money on them going back to Ypsilanti with having the spread covered on them is going to be a great, though. I mean, looking back, Weber State, who was as a ranked team in the FCS, they're ranked number 24 coming into the season. They got absolutely decimated last week, 35-3 at Husky Stadium. Eastern Michigan coming into Husky Stadium as well. That was a 32-point cover the spread situation, but Eastern Michigan, not an FCS school. That is a MAC contender. I'm going to lean toward the spread in favor of Eastern Michigan. I'd give them 27.5 points, but I wouldn't feel very confident about it. And then as for an over-under, I really don't even know which way to split it here. 35 points is all that they could put up against the FCS school. And then you look at Eastern Michigan, not necessarily scored that many points in their game. I would lean toward the under, but I probably wouldn't make the pick here. I'd probably punt it on to the next game. Northern Illinois plus 29.5 as they go to South Bend. There we go, to take on number 5 Notre Dame. I would not take Notre Dame here on the spread, minus 29.5. I watched that game last week. Riley Leonard from Duke now taking over the quarterbacking duties there. He looked very impressive in some form or fashion. He was a great leader, but as far as ball control and precise passing and other things that you may want from a quarterback, he didn't necessarily fulfill. He was definitely a gamer though. He picked up the first downs when they need to. That's why I'm going to say Notre Dame, a heavy defensive team, very much integral ball control kind of offense. I just don't think they're going to score a 30-point spread on a Northern Illinois team that is better than most people thought. Northern, and I say thought as in across time. I mean, you used to think of Northern Illinois as not even a contender. Northern Illinois, a bowl team last year, has really kind of stepped up to the upper levels of the MAC. There'll be a team that'll be competing with Eastern Michigan to take the MAC championship possibly this year. So I would say that I think Northern Illinois scores on Notre Dame, but not very much. But I don't think Notre Dame wastes a lot of time scoring points either. I think Notre Dame's key to this game is going to be put them down early and never give them a chance to get back into it. And but I don't think they beat them by 30. So I would lean Northern Illinois on the spread. As for the over under 45 and a half points, I'm going to go with the under. I think that Notre Dame probably wins this game like 31 to 7, 31 to 3, 31 to 10. Iowa State, Iowa, though. Classic rivalry here. Iowa looks like they can finally score points. Iowa State, little unknown to me. I got to look, see Iowa State played North Dakota, a ranked FCS school. They were able to beat them 21 to 3. That kind of makes me lean toward Iowa here. They're only giving them 2.5 points. It's in Iowa. It's a huge rivalry game every year. But given that Iowa State played a much higher ranked Illinois State, beat them 40 to nothing, was able to move the ball almost with will. It's going to be in Kinnick Stadium for the Cyhawk Trophy. If I'm not mistaken, Iowa is on a winning streak in the playoff or in the rivalry game. Actually, only a single year. I'm going to lean toward Iowa here. Think they win by more than 2.5 points. As for an over under, I'm going to think that it'll probably lean toward the over. I think Iowa can score points, but I don't think that it's going to be enough. Temple.
Oh, there's still a lot to go, buddy.
Oh yeah, still a lot to go. As I was scrolling through, my lord, these college games just keep coming. Temple and Navy. I think we can start to get a whole lot more selective at this point. Temple and Navy. No idea where to go there. Baylor and Utah.
I think that's pretty much what they have for the most part. I got a dedication medal and 250 of the other one.
Oh, this is an interesting one. In Lexington, Kentucky, SEC match. Going to be kicking off the SEC season. South Carolina being hosted by Kentucky. They're giving Kentucky 9.5 points. I'd almost lean toward that direction, though. I mean, the staff has been in place at Kentucky for so long at this point. South Carolina kind of skated out of against at home against Old Dominion by the skin of their teeth. Meanwhile, Kentucky blew out Southern Miss by 31 to nothing. I gotta think that Kentucky continue their winning ways against the South Carolina team. A little down on their luck right now. South Carolina has never been strong against Kentucky. SEC Nation's going to be there. Kentucky looking to make a statement game in Mark Stoops' 12th season. Everything that he can do to continue to build the attention on that program, to continue to push them in the upper echelon. I gotta think he's gonna have his team ready to go. They're not gonna be flat-footed, and they gotta know the assignment. When an SEC game is on your schedule against a team that you should beat, you come out there and win. So I'm going to favor Kentucky to take South Carolina down 3:30 game on ABC. As for the over under 45 and a half points, it's hard to think one way or the other on that. I don't think it's going to be 35 to 10. I think it could be an over because of that, maybe 35 to 17. But I also could very well see that this is a lower scoring affair. Could be 24 to 10, could be 24-17.
I I would venture to say the under in this one. I both teams not particularly like the most explosive, but could damn sure get us a good game here. I also have to agree with your pick on the spread. I think Kentucky, I would venture to say, will win by 10 or more.
Yeah, it seems such a foregone conclusion. I may hold this pick as my backup pick because I will say that it may be closer than the 10-point spread because damn it, boy, that Old Dominion game may have woken something up in South Carolina. I mean, Lenore Sellers is a talent. McCole Harbor is a talent. They've got some guys that really could potentially put up points, but man, they were just a few hairs away from losing at home to a maybe what should have been an overmatched opponent. Continuing to run through these spreads, I would stay as far away from the Mississippi Middle Tennessee State line. 41.5 points is absolutely crazy. I, I would also stay away from the over under 63.5 points is crazy. I mean, trust me, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin are going to score points, but in a 12 game playoff, he doesn't have to put his foot on the gas that hard. If he gets up 42 to nothing and you're sitting here clamoring for the over, and Middle Tennessee can't get in the scoring position for him to really feel like he's got to keep his foot on the gas, you're just going to be cursing out loud as that clock runs out. Virginia Tech, after struggling against Vanderbilt, hosting Marshall, they're giving 20.5 points to Marshall. Man, just really depends on how bad you think Virginia Tech is down. 20.5 points is a big spread. That's kind of one of those games that make you hungry to bet on it because you're sitting here looking like it may be just served up on a platter for you. Marshall, of course, in the Sun Belt, they're 1-0 after beating the snot out of Stony Brook. And again, Virginia Tech struggled against Vanderbilt last week, lost in overtime. Think they're looking to get back on track. I'd stay away from this one, but I would, if I had to, lean toward Marshall 20.5 points. I mean, that's just a big spread. I mean, you could lose 35 to 17 and cover that spread. Speaking of Old Dominion, Eastern Carolina being hosted by Old Dominion, they're giving Old Dominion 2.5 points. I think I'd go toward Eastern Carolina probably here.
No, it
Central Michigan and the Chippewas. Gotta think, is Jim McElwain even the coach still at Central Michigan? Yeah, in his sixth season, Jim McElwain still holding it down. They beat Central Connecticut 66 to 10. FIU is whom they're being hosted by. They're given 6.5 points to FIU. Is currently on the downslope. They lost last week and looking to rebound. And I gotta say, I'm trying to get a handle on FIU here. Which conference are they in? Conference USA, gotta be, yeah. They lost to Indiana 7-31. They're looking to bounce back here. Hosted at Pitbull Stadium. Pitbull. I mean,
Mr. Worldwide.
yeah. I mean, he's paying 1.2 million dollars annually to have it named after him.
That's pretty cheap.
I gotta I gotta lean towards Central Michigan. I mean, they put up some points. FIU did not. I mean, maybe FIU is a better opponent, but I know that McElwain has established quite a program at Central Michigan. I mean, it's his little kingdom, and I would be interested to see that game. That certainly would be a game, but it's on ESPN Plus. I ain't watching it. I ain't got the Plus anymore, but trying to see what ESPN will say here. They're giving Central Michigan 76.1% chance to beat FIU. It's only a 6.5 point spread. Will they win by a touchdown or more? I think so. I think that
Uh,
could
I
very
think
well be a safe bet. I mean, especially
yeah, I think
considering,
that's pretty favorable.
I mean, they demolished their opponent last week, 66-10, and FIU lost to probably one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, 31-7. As I'm looking here, FIU's last five, all losses, 41-16. Jacksonville State, 40-6. Middle Tennessee State, 44-20. Arkansas, 41-28. Western Kentucky, and of course Indiana. So Central Michigan looking to get on the good side here. Going to try and seize a big victory on the road. Team Houston State, UCF, I'm not interested in spending too much time on. San Jose State, Air Force, kind of a West Coast matchup that I don't know much about. But the ACC still got intra-conference play here. Virginia being hosted by Wake Forest. It's a 3.5 point spread. Let's delve into this for a moment. We're going to go hand in hand and learn on this one together. But,
Sure. I think I've already told you I'm not a fish guy. That's pretty fucking good.
oh man, I am struggling. There we go. West Virginia and Virginia, I should say, and Wake Forest. Virginia, they're not so good last year, but they did beat Richmond 34-13. Wake Forest not so good last year either, 45-13 against North Carolina A&T. This is a battle of battle of not so strong teams, but the matchup predictor is leaning heavily in favor of Wake Forest. 65.9%. They're giving Wake Forest to be able to take down Virginia. 2.5 point spread. I'd probably lean toward Wake Forest here.
I mean, I'm one way or the other on this one. It it's two teams once again I'm just not very well versed in. 2.5 is pretty generous either way, so I think either way is a safe bet here. Uh, the over under that might be a bit sketchy.
Yeah, it's definitely sketchy for two teams. You got a Wake Forest team that scored 45 points last week against an FCS school. You got a Virginia team that only scored 34 last week against an FCS school. So it's kind of, what will it look like when they have to play? It's like beating a high school team as a junior college team. What are you going to look like against another junior college team? So I don't know about the over under there. I'm not too impressed with either's offense. Just looking at total statistics here, especially the quality of who they played. That being said, I do like Wake Forest minus 2.5. Georgia Southern Nevada not jumping out to me here. We've got some ranked matchups here, but the spreads are so huge. South Florida 31.5 against Alabama. Alabama's still kind of an unknown product with Caden DeBoer. They really killed Western Kentucky last week. Probably could kill South Florida as well, but I wouldn't put my money on it. Buffalo 34.5 point spread against being hosted in Columbia by Missouri. Wouldn't jump on that one either. Same thing with Western Michigan, Ohio State. Ohio State's given 38.5 points to Western Michigan. What I'm much more interested here, Tennessee, 7.5 being given to North Carolina State, who's hosting them. But this is a neutral site game. This is going to be in Charlotte, 7:30 p.m. on ABC. I'd almost say that this is probably the easiest pick for me. I've got to go Tennessee 7.5. Tennessee with Nico. I am a leave. I can never pronounce his name, but one of the top recruits 2 years ago. He's been in the system for a year, knows the playbook back and forth. He's an incredible athlete that we've seen thus far. Absolute great show from him. And then on the other side, North Carolina State looked pretty disappointing, if we're being honest. Western Carolina, Catamounts, Kerwin Bell's Catamounts out there, gave them very much a run for their money in a what should have been a cupcake game for North Carolina State, which should have been a game for North Carolina State to come out and score 45 points and win by 30. Instead, they were in a shootout into the fourth quarter and ended up able to win by 10 or so points, just going off the top of my head. It was not an impressive showing for them. Certainly not, the kind of thing that makes you think that they can compete with the Tennessee school who beat Chattanooga, who was a FCS playoffs team last year. They beat them 69-7. I would say that given that it's only a 7.5 point spread, Tennessee has played well in neutral site games in Charlotte in the past. They've played very many of them, and when you look at it, matchup predictor right now, 87.9% in favor of Tennessee. I think they win by more than a touchdown. I think they might win by more than 3 touchdowns. I take it back, not 63-7 or 69-7, 69-3. And Western Kentucky or Western Carolina giving North Carolina State everything they're worth. I'd say Tennessee 7.5 points, pretty good pick, and I'm going to make that a key pick this week for me. Finally, Colorado, Nebraska, certainly a matchup that people have had eye on for a long time. This goes back to the Big 8 days in the old school conference. Colorado, Nebraska, and Oklahoma were all in a conference together. They merged with the remnants of the Southwestern Conference and formed the Big 12. Of course, as we mentioned before, Colorado goes running from the Big 12 into the Pac 12. Nebraska ends up going to the Big 10. Nebraska still in the Big 10. Colorado back in the Big 12. But this rivalry seeming to get rebooted here. 7:30 on NBC is going to be an interesting game. They're given 7.5 points to Coach Prime's Colorado. Nebraska is certainly a team that people have a lot of question marks about. Can they be any good? You talk about top-level recruits. We mentioned Nico from 2 years ago. Last year's top recruit is right there in Nebraska. Dylan Raiola, everybody calls him I guess we could say Dollar General brand. He's a Dollar General brand Patrick Mahomes. If you don't know what he is or what he looks like, go look him up. He dresses like him, acts like him, looks like him. He's a little bit chubbier than he is, but he definitely is styling himself after Patrick Mahomes. But the one thing I have to say is a 7.5 point spread. We're talking about a guy that we still have question marks about. He's a freshman, a true freshman. Can he lead at home victory in the Sear Red against the Colorado team that we've got a lot of question marks about as well? But one difference I have to say is that we know what we have in Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders, a potential Heisman candidate right now, a potential first-round pick going in the draft next year. We know what we have in Travis Hunter, who probably will be the number 1 pick in next year's draft. I gotta say, given 7.5 points to Colorado, it's a big game. It's all about line of scrimmage play, though. Colorado struggled against North Dakota State, the runner-up of the national championship, the FCS last year. Nebraska looked good in their game. I got to delve into exactly who that was against, but I do remember the highlights going in their favor. Dylan Raiola was out there making plays. Will this go in their favor? Probably more than we would think, but honestly, I gotta say I don't feel confident with a 7.5 point spread. I feel that if Nebraska wins, it's going to be close, and it's going to be painfully close. Nebraska, of course, going back to beat UTEP 40-0 at home. Uh, Not very confident on this one, but I guess I'm gonna flip it and go Nebraska 7.5 or minus 7.5. But I would go with the over 57.5 points. Both of these teams are going to score. They're going to score a lot. Houston and Oklahoma, just briefly, not very interested there. It's a 30-point spread. Oklahoma absolutely decimated their opponent last week. Houston, as we mentioned, brand new coach, getting his feet wet there.
Battleground.
Boise State, Oregon, a lot more interest in here. It's an 18.5 point spread. Dan Lanning and Dylan Gabriel, Oregon Ducks, they're going to be looking to get national relevance here. Mountain West Conference game against the Big Ten. And it's in Alton Stadium. It's 10 o'clock game. It's going to definitely be must-see TV. I don't know where to go. I mean, Oregon and Boise State have always been good. They always play each other closer than the experts think.
I believe so.
I really I wouldn't feel a lot of confidence.
I haven't particularly worked on any of it yet. Like, I took a pretty good nap earlier. But just from basic overlook, like, it doesn't seem like it's going to be too difficult. Especially with the Saga champions we have for this time.
Arizona State hosting Mississippi State. Certainly a interesting matchup here. That and Texas Tech, Washington State. Those are the two that catch my eye the most. Oregon State, San Diego State. Don't know enough about them to make a pick here, but I do like Mississippi State plus 6.5 against Arizona State. Mississippi State's got a new coach, but they've got a good talent profile versus an Arizona State team that has kind of underperformed as the last few years have gone on. I mean, they've fired Herm Edwards and brought somebody else in. I would be pretty satisfied with a plus 6.5 for Mississippi State. But finally, we can close the door on Saturday into a pretty basic slate of games on Sunday. An NFC South matchup that certainly is one to keep an eye on. The Carolina Panthers are being hosted by the New Orleans Saints, 1 o'clock on Fox.
This is an NFC South matchup I normally like to watch. I definitely enjoy seeing what the Saints can bring forth. As we saw with Carolina last season, it was absolutely abysmal. I believe they've picked up a few good pieces for both the offense and defense. I do feel this is still definitely a building year for Carolina, but New Orleans with 4.5, I think that's pretty favorable.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at New Orleans, they're a more complete team. You know, they were able to pick up Talise Fuaga, offensive tackle out of Oregon State. But what I'm most interested in, they got Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, defensive back. They were also able to pick up Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. So they've got some depth pieces at quarterback. I like Derek Carr. I like Taysom Hill as it is. But they really need to be able to replace Jameis Winston as a true backup quarterback. When you look at games that the Panthers played against the Saints last year in the Superdome in December 10th, the Panthers were decimated 28-6 to the Panthers. Panthers also lost to them 20-17 in a home game early in the season. It's a good chance they come out flat-footed, but like you said, it's a 4.5 point spread. They wouldn't have covered it in game one, but they did in game two. I like New Orleans to cover the spread. I think they beat Carolina by more than a touchdown. I think that when you think about these teams, you think about Dennis Allen leading this Saints team. He's been there for a few years. He knows what's going to be necessary to kind of compete in this division. Now, granted, the Panthers are going to be looking to really bounce back this year, but I don't see it happening here early. I like New Orleans' chances.
As for the over under, I think I'm favoring the under in this matchup. Uh, I don't feel very strong with both of these teams having a particularly explosive offense. Uh, I'm looking for Carolina to actually flex a little bit of red zone defensive muscle in this game. I feel more confident in the under.
Yeah, I gotta say I feel less confident in the under than you do, but I will say, at least as far as a key, when we're looking at this game, if Carolina is flexing some red zone muscle, as you said, I would favor the under as well, because looking back last season, the first game definitely would have blown out the over under, but this time around, a 41.5 point spread, I kind of favor the under as well. I mean, neither one of these teams are extremely offensive minded teams right now. Going on to another 1 o'clock game, though, we're going to get to see Caleb Williams in action in Soldier Field as they host the Tennessee Titans. Look to kind of bounce back, and a new look Tennessee Titans at that.
I I'm looking at this as one of the more unfriendly 1 o'clock games for the Sunday spread. This is going to be a question of, has Tennessee picked off enough people in the offseason to recoup losses and come out strong, as opposed to Chicago seemingly now having to answer, are they an NFC North contender or are they even an NFC contender?
Yeah, it's interesting. You got two different teams, both in the same mindset, but moving in very different fashions. Tennessee taking early round picks to bolster their offensive line, something that they kind of struggled with in these last few years, as you've seen guys kind of moving on, retiring, and they weren't able to protect and truly build a team. You know, they had a team at one point, but didn't have the guy to get them over the hump. They think Will Levis may very well be that guy right now, and he certainly showed flashes of that last season, despite again not having the protection he needed to work. But when you take that into account, I like the offseason movements for a team like Tennessee. But I also like the offseason movements for the Bears. You go a team that really went in the opposite direction. You know, one team is slow and steady wins the race, and having been a Detroit Lions fan for as long as we've been Detroit Lions fans, we know that what Tennessee's doing is the rebuild that pays dividends down the road. But Chicago rebuilding the way they're doing is they're doing it in a sexy way, and it's hard to tell what that yields right now. I mean, odds are going the sexy way. You bring in Caleb Williams, you bring in Roman Dunze, you bring in DeAndre Swift, you trade in and you bring in Keenan Allen. You got DJ Moore last year. You know, you're so loaded up with talent right now. The real question is, will you be able to mesh that talent? Will you be able to protect the quarterback so that talent is even accessible? Will you be able to maintain that powerful defense that you've been known for? Uh, So a lot of those questions are going to be answered here. It's given 4.5 points to Tennessee. I'm with you. I would not really feel confident taking the spread here, but when you start looking at that over under, I'm almost just dying with the over here. 20 to 25 points per team. I think this is going to be uh, not necessarily a shootout, but I think both teams are going to crack 20 points. That's where I would lean toward the over here.
It really depends on what defenses come to play. If the Titans somehow just have that secondary wake up and play a little bit of football, this could be a game where it floats between the over and the under. Like, I'm not particularly confident with either here. Uh, I think even for the spread, like, I think the spread kind of floats in both teams' favor just because, like you said, there's so many new variables here. There's questions that we have to answer here. I don't particularly like any of the options to take.
Yeah, you make a great point. There's so many variables on that Chicago side. There's so much new. Tennessee's new isn't as big a question mark, other than the Derrick Henry change. But we've already seen Tajay Spears work in that offense, and
Yeah, and with Tony Pollard as well sitting in that backfield, like I feel pretty confident they may not get like the big number rushing that they were used to with Henry, but they
consistency.
should, yeah, absolutely, they should have a very consistent backfield.
Whereas those Bears, that does make you real nervous with the over because you know what a rookie quarterback can come out and do.
Absolutely.
A rookie quarterback can come out and be Cam Newton and pass for 400 yards and catch everybody's attention. But most of the time, a rookie quarterback is going to come out and have two picks and a fumble and be sitting there staring at their hands. It all depends on how they handle the situation. So I would punt on to the next game. We've got Houston given 2.5 points on the road against Indianapolis.
Now, I'm looking at this. I think this is one of the more sexy 1 o'clock matchups we have in week one. This is two AFC powerhouse teams this season. I believe both of these teams are going to try to come out swinging. Indianapolis may have a few more question marks around them currently, but the way they've built up, man, that should be a strong team offensively and defensively.
Yeah, I look at this Houston team and I like Houston, but honestly, this is not the 1 o'clock pick that jumps out to me. We're still a few decibel, a few drops away from that one. Houston in this particular matchup, I like. It's in Indianapolis. It's a 2.5 point spread. Again, I like it, but
I,
in
I feel the
general,
spread is very floaty, but as far as the over under, I would venture to say the under on this one I feel confident with just because like I think it'll be such a good defensive and offensive game. I don't I could see a 20 to 24 here or a 20 to 23.
yeah, it's not a good matchup for scheme wise. You think Houston is going to move the ball around in the playmakers down the field, a lot of downfield passing. They've got some weapons in the backfield, but that's not really going to be the main drag for them. Whereas the Colts are going to be more ball control, going to be more rush play action, get the ball to the tight end. If it's Indianapolis' game, it's going to be the under for sure. If it's Houston's game, it may be the under. So I like the under as well, just for that, schematically. Because if Indianapolis wins this game, it's for sure going to be an under. If Houston wins, it's probably going to be the under. But it could be the over, because Houston's going to get the ball in the hands of their wide receiver playmakers, move them down the field. What does Stephon Diggs do in this new environment with a new quarterback? But in general, I will say, looking at a bigger picture, I'm down on Houston this year. I think Houston did really well with a last place schedule, but winning the division may be a curse for them. And you look at Indianapolis, who lost the division, they're going to have that last place schedule, but have some guys in place.
Are you semi-hot taking that C.J. Stroud is going to go through the sophomore slump?
I am not hot taking the sophomore slump. I think that C.J. Stroud may not be the weak point for him, but I think that that franchise is going to experience a slump this year compared to the high highs of last year.
You heard it here, folks. That's a strong prediction.
That's a lukewarm take. Speaking of lukewarm takes, Arizona plus 5.5 in Buffalo, 1 p.m. game on CBS. Buffalo, Buffalo, Buffalo. You talk about Stephon Diggs in one breath, and here we are back with the gap that he left. What will Buffalo
Mm-hmm.
look like without Stephon Diggs? What would they look like without Devin Singletary? And if I'm not mistaken, James Cook he's the guy now.
I mean, there's a whole lot that's new to Buffalo this season, but I believe it's all new that's trending upward. I don't see Buffalo having a bad season. And honestly, I think 5.5's a little low for this game. I think it should be pretty safe to take them 5.5 over Arizona.
Well, I gotta say, you think about that, Arizona, they're gonna have you know some different pieces involved here. What will Marvin Harrison Jr. mean for that team? I gotta say, if I've gotta pick a 1 o'clock game, this is not the game. It's certainly the next game, and we will get to that momentarily. But you think they lost Marquise Brown, but they bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. They've got a lot of confidence there. James Conner, Trey Benson, going to be reliable hands in the running backs. Jonathan Gannon coming in last year that didn't have a great year, but it's kind of a make or break time for them. I I don't know exactly how I feel for it, but I will say this: if I've got to go with maybe a third 1 o'clock game that I feel confident about, I kind of lean toward Buffalo as well, minus 5.5 here. It's at home. It's such a difference for an Arizona team to go all the way up to Buffalo. Now, granted, this would be a lot more favorable to Buffalo if this were played in December. But, you know, Buffalo is still Buffalo, and they still got a lot of pieces. So I would lean to them minus 5.5. Over under here, I don't really.
It's a tough call on this one.
Yeah, both of these teams can score points.
Yeah, and Buffalo a little more so than Arizona, I feel, but that defense could be very stingy too.
Sure, and that could definitely change the way you look at it, and but they can also score points too. We've seen that with Buffalo. They're
yeah.
a ball hawking defense at times. But going on to 1 o'clock games you feel confident about, this is probably the NFL game I feel most confident about. Cincinnati minus 8.5 against a bad New England team.
Oh, what a terrible, terrible New England team.
Yeah, New England's easily my pick to be the worst in the NFL this year.
I believe in karmic justice, and I believe that's what they're going through and will continue going through for the next couple of seasons. As it has just been, yet again, as in Carolina's case, abysmal.
The only question mark right now is Jamar Chase.
Well, maybe more so for the fantasy side, but I think even if something happens with Chase, Cincinnati's loaded with enough options to
Sure, but
handily.
if Jamar Chase plays and because he's practicing now, if he comes out and plays a healthy Joe Burrow, a healthy Jamar Chase, I have no doubt that they're going to beat New England by 10. I have no doubt they're going to beat New England by 15. Over under, I'm not too interested in playing around with. It could be a 35 to 10 game. You easily could get burned by the over under here. Either way, most of the time I'd lean toward the under because I don't think New England's going to put up a lot of points against the Cincinnati team. But, you know, why even flirt with it when you've got such a clear spread pick here? Speaking of spread picks here, we've got a Florida AFC matchup, 1 p.m. on CBS, when Miami down there at Hard Rock Stadium going to be hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're giving 3.5 points to the home team. I got to say, this is a game I want to watch. This is not a game I really feel confident about putting anything on.
I think this is another one of the sexy 1 o'clock matchups. I look for this to be just, at first, maybe a more so defensive outing on both sides, but probably by halftime or after, I think we're entering a shootout.
Yeah, and if we were looking at this in 2023 terms, I'd take a 3.5 point spread for Miami all day. We're coming into a new season, though. There's a risk that somebody comes out flat-footed. There's also a risk that Jacksonville has been able to take this offseason and get recentered, that we see the Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, kind of coalesce and be the Jacksonville Jaguars that they were in 2022. And that could very well mean that a 3.5 point spread is not something you feel confident taking Miami on. Not that say that Miami's not good. Miami's going to score a lot of points. Miami probably wins the game, but Jacksonville could keep it very close, and Jacksonville could potentially win the game too. That's why this is another one of those games where it's not even the spread that I'm not so confident about. It's the matchup, man. This could be a very interesting matchup, and we just haven't seen enough Jacksonville to know which team they're going to be this year.
I am confident on the over in this one. I do believe a big point in Miami's attack for this game should be either a split between the throwing side and the running side, or more so a focus on running for downs. We know that the backfield has stayed the same. I mean, that's a strong backfield with Raheem Mostert still running back one. And we remember last season how insane this offense was as a whole, but with Hill getting his numbers, Mostert getting his numbers, I mean, I think this is going to be an incredibly high scoring game.
Well, that's interesting that you say that. It does seem like Mostert is kind of RB1, but from a lot of talk coming out of camp is that they're thinking that Devon Achane may end up being RB1 here, if
Well,
not early. But
it could be an interesting switch up just for the purposes of people have so much tape now on Mostert that switching over isn't going to be a terrible idea. I'm sure they utilize both in whatever schemes they play for the rest of the season, but I mean, either way you lean, that backfield is ridiculously dirty.
yeah, and it's such an interesting mix. I mean, it's a true thunder and lightning backfield where,
Oh, yeah.
Mostert, big bruiser, is going to be able to do it, but A Chain legitimately has track speed. I mean, he's only a hair behind Tyreek Hill as far as speed on that team. And that's such a dangerous matchup when you start talking about X's and O's when you've got both of those guys, A Chain's passing ability out of the backfield or pass catching ability out of the backfield. I mean, you talk about a very dangerous weapon. I like the over as well, though, going back to, 49.5 points. That's 25 and 25. I think that we see
Easily. Easily.
probably 30 both teams crack 30 here, or possibly at least one team cracks 30 here. So I feel pretty confident in that, fairly confident. I may downgrade that a tad only because I could see a reality where Miami wins this game 38-14. I could see a reality where Jacksonville is so flat-footed that Miami can't cover the over by themselves. So
Yeah.
Jacksonville has to carry their weight for the over to go. But I think that if Jacksonville does carry their weight, if Jacksonville shows up ready to play, the over is for sure going to happen with the weapons on both sides of this game. Talk about weapons. We've got a clear mismatch in weapons here. I like this game. I, I I just really question Sam Darnold here. He's the only factor as the Giants host Minnesota on 1 p.m. on Fox. I mean, Justin Jefferson's healthy. Addison's ready to go. The only problem is J.J. McCarthy's knee. Talking about Michigan earlier, J.J. McCarthy's knee doing no good for Minnesota. Sam Darnold underneath center there. You got New York Giants. I don't really know what to expect out of them. Most people are
Yeah.
kind of picking them to be the New England Patriots of the NFC.
I'm very uncertain on the Giants this season. I think the first few games are needed before we have any real certain opinion of what they have in store for this season. But with what they lost with Barkley, I'm sure they've lost a few a handful of other valuable weapons. This team is just full of questions, potentially full of holes. I do like Minnesota in this one. I hate to say that with that being a North rival for us, but
Yeah, hard for me
this
to pick.
just this is definitely a good looking Minnesota team as long as it functions properly, as long as the defense shows up and gets a few couple third down stops. This could be a good Minnesota game.
Yeah, it's one of the games I like at 1 o'clock. I I'm having trouble making that my pick here. As I'm sitting here looking, I still got
Well, the
two more
the
picks
over
to
under
go,
is incredibly difficult with this one because, like I said, we have no idea what that Giants offense could end up looking
and we
like.
have no idea how Sam Darnold's gonna be in that Minnesota offense. They've
Yeah,
got the weapons. You know, Even though they've changed the guard and the running back once again, I still feel fairly good that they're going to be able to do what's necessary to keep the ball moving. A very serviceable back in Aaron Jones coming into Minnesota. It's just really, will Sam Darnold be able to get the ball to those high profile wide receivers? And of course, Hawk is still out. He's on the pup list still. So, not going to have that level of security blanket for a quarterback that has underperformed at every station he's been in. So I kind of nervous to make that pick, but I like that spread. That minus, literally, it's just to keep it from a tie at this point.
yeah.
So,
Well,
Minnesota wins by a point. They cover the spread.
I think I would be okay taking Minnesota on the half point.
Going to our last 1 o'clock game here, though. Pittsburgh being hosted by Atlanta. Pittsburgh is a big question mark right now.
They are coming in as a team that I think once again is definitely going to put over 500 by the end of the season, but it may once again be by a 9-8 type record or a 10-7 type record where Atlanta, at least from what I've been hearing, it seems like Atlanta has a lot of heat behind them. They could end up being the surprise team from the NFC this year. Boy, 2.5. I feel like that's pretty on the nose for where this game could be, but first game of the season, who knows? Again, we could be completely surprised. This could be an absolute dud of a matchup. This could be an absolute stud of a matchup where we see both teams amassing combined like 35 or more points.
Well, the media perception right now is that Atlanta covers this spread easily, that Pittsburgh comes out and Russell Wilson can't move the ball. I would say that if Pittsburgh wins from what we've seen from them thus far through the preseason, it favors the under. If Atlanta wins, we don't really know where it's going to be. But if the over gets covered, I would assume Atlanta wins. That being said, I'm not really confident in any of these picks on this particular game. It's such a it's such a great example of kind of what I was talking about earlier, and that you mentioned there. First games of the season, it's so hard to make judgments on. Now, I will say the NFL is a little easier than college. You don't have that transfer portal issues. The free agency is a little easier to keep track of, but man, oh man, it is tough to really get a decent idea of what these teams are going to look like. So I don't feel confident one way or the other on these, but I will say that on to the next game. This 4:05 matchup. It's the early 4 o'clock game. Denver being hosted by Seattle on CBS. 5.5 points to a road Denver team. Bo Nix now the starting quarterback. Seattle really looked good in spurts last year.
This is an interesting matchup. I think this should actually end up being a pretty good game. Both teams, like you said, definitely having a bit of a struggling season last year, but with the rebuilds that I've seen them in, and it seems like both teams unfortunately have been in the rebuilds the last few seasons. Uh, Seattle always kind of a safe bet to be pretty strong, but man, Denver could surprise us.
Yeah, I don't know what to think. You have to take the wild part here. Pete Carroll's not the
Five and a
coach.
half might be generous.
Yeah, but Pete Carroll's not the coach. We don't know what this Seattle team's going to be. In fact, Mike McDonald, former Michigan former defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, is the head coach.
Oh, that's an interesting change.
I mean, he's almost our age. He is 37 years old. That is weird to say that out loud. I feel like I'm closer in age to Pete Carroll. Like when I see
As
him.
I'd say, considering I'm 63 years old.
Yeah. 69. I don't know about you. I just get 69, even more 69 every year.
That's right.
Las Vegas being hosted by the Chargers, the LA Chargers. They're giving them 3.5 points. The fighting Harbaughs here. And I'm going to be honest with you. This is a game I'm a little bit more confident in. I like the Chargers 3.5 points over the Vegas. In fact,
I don't know in this one.
yeah, I don't feel confident about anything to do with the Raiders.
Because, man, like, I know the Raiders put a little time and effort into their off season, but even so, like it's just there is a lot of questions and expectations for the Raiders to come out swinging. But man, like you said, like we got Harbaugh with the Chargers now. This should be, if not interesting, then one of maybe the more formidable AFC teams this season.
I like the Chargers draft. They took Joe Alt, big offensive lineman, one of the most talented offensive linemen in college football the last few years. They took Lad McConkey, great white possession receiver, like just the most annoying dude that's going to catch the ball and go like 4 or 5 yards. It's very clear the kind of team that he's building. He's building the type of team he likes. He's moving in the opposite direction of the NFL. He's going to run the ball, 30 or 40 times a game. He's going to work play action. He's going to look to have his receivers in position to do possession type catches, pick the first down up. He's not looking to burn down the field. It's going to be a very change of pace for a Chargers team that in the past few years has looked to be a very downfield air raid type offense. I I don't know how successful that's going to be, but I will say this: you compare it to what I felt like the Raiders had attempted to do in the offseason. I don't think that the Raiders, they Antonio Pierce is a player's coach. They love him, but they brought in Brock Bowers. They also brought in offensive linemen, but they went later and later, and I don't really know what to expect. I mean, Zamir White is solid. They got Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams, and now Brock Bowers. But they got Gardner Minshew back there under center. They had an opportunity to take a quarterback. They need a quarterback. They didn't take one. I don't know what to expect with the Raiders. They're a big question mark, but you got to think that Josh Jacobs isn't there anymore. Zamir White, he did great with them in the past as that kind of depth piece for him. I'm interested to see what he could do. Now as the full time guy, but I don't like what the Raiders could be. I don't see a situation where the Raiders are going to be, what's the right way to say it? I don't see a situation where the Raiders are going to be competing for the division or even the wild card
Yeah.
spot. And
Yeah, I have to agree with you there.
the Chargers don't really have a home field advantage. So, the more I sit here and talk, the less that I'm really convinced in the 3.5 point spread. However, the 40.5 point under, I'm pretty favorable on. Given that the Chargers want to run the ball and control the ball and eat up clock, I like the under. And given that I don't really see where Vegas is going to be able to contest that, I also like it. So the under kind of screams out to me. Continuing on down, we've got just a handful of games left. Dallas being hosted by Cleveland in the first of the later 425 games. Dallas given 2.5 points in Cleveland. This is not a matchup that I could call here. I think Cleveland, if it was Cleveland from last year, I probably would lean toward Dallas. But, Cleveland has some dogs on that team, man. I really could
I
see them being able to take this victory.
I like Cleveland at home. I like that it's only a 2.5 point here for them as well. The fact that we have a backfield of Nick Chubb, who's, up in the air status at the moment, I believe. I don't think there's any official word that he's back currently,
No, yeah,
but
he's still in IR probably for the next 4 or 5 weeks.
uh, I made a very, like, I feel very confident. I made an investiture in him in a league I'm in for fantasy. I feel pretty good that until Chubb is back, like, Jerome Ford should be a solid running back. I think against this Dallas team, which, a great re signing of CD Lamb and some odd moves in this off season, but I really like Cleveland at home here. Only 2.5. I think that's pretty solid. The over under, this could be an over matchup here. Like, I definitely see both offenses putting up points. I think the defenses will look good at times, but I think we go over here.
I don't know what to say to the re-signing of Ezekiel Elliott. That to me seemed odd.
They got to have someone back there.
It seemed like a very Dallas Cowboys move to bring back the guy that you released, and he's there. I mean, Rico Dowdle, honestly, big time player to keep an eye on this year. They're thinking that Dowdle, especially through training camp, may be getting more of the line share of the carries. But I don't know where to go with the Dallas Cowboys. There's certainly some things that are interesting about the way they've constructed themselves. I mean, bringing in Trey Lance still kind of shakes my head, but that also bringing in Trey Lance also kind of, they've got a solid second string quarterback in Cooper Rush. We saw what Cooper Rush has been able to do when Dak's been out, but what happens when Trey Lance goes under center or is brought in a package and they shift him around and he's
Hmm.
able to make a play with his legs? That's what
Of course.
the kind of interesting factor there. Because of all these question marks, I don't feel real great about anything here with the Dallas Cleveland game. Cleveland, I like that Cleveland team. I think that Deshaun Watson is an incredible talent that's got to be somewhere still in him. I mean, obviously, all the things. I'm not saying that we should
Yeah,
put
don't
him in
like
the Hall
all
of
the
Fame,
other stuff now,
but
getting on this stuff, but that's command play.
I will say, moving on to our next game, you talk about the Dallas Cowboys, their rivals, the Washington Red Commanders. They're being hosted by the Tampa Bay, well, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I almost said the Tampa Bay Lightning. I got so off by trying to twist around the old Redskins name. But the Buccaneers, man, given 3.5 points to Washington, this is not a game I feel great about either. Uh,
Yeah, it's
Washington is supposed to be a team that is much improved with the
it's
draft. I
it's
just,
an odd NFC matchup for sure.
yeah, I mean, if we were picking this game last year and there weren't as many question marks at Washington, I'd take Tampa Bay minus 3.5 all day. But there's so many changes for this team in the Washington Commanders. I just don't feel great about having to really put my money where my mouth is at what they could look like coming in. I mean, Jaden Daniels is a big time addition. They've been able to revamp part of their defense through the draft as well. I mean, they were one of those teams that had three second round picks. They're also supposedly going to be able to use McCaffrey, and I'm talking about McCaffrey. They've got Luke McCaffrey, which is Christian McCaffrey's little brother. They took him in a late round pick. He used to play at Nebraska, ended up at Rice. He's one of those multi positional players. They really like what he's been able to do through training camp in the preseason. They're expected to kind of use him in multiple roles. I'm not saying that it's going to work, but with the addition of Austin Eckler to a backfield that already had Brian Robinson kind of carrying the lion's shares there, they've got wide receivers that can make plays with Terry McLaurin. I'm not saying that I'm big on them. You got Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott that they took kind of in the draft. I'm not saying I am big on them. I'm just saying that I don't want to be responsible for saying that Tampa Bay is going to run away with this game and then come to find out that Washington is the dark horse team of the year. So that being said, when folks that are a little more plugged in than I am, especially with Dan Quinn kind of coming in and taking this team over, I'm just not willing to put it out there. So I don't like this spread. Over under, there's just not enough there to know.
I want to venture and say maybe the under on this one, just because there's so many unknowns. We know that there are select ways to stop up Tampa Bay and force them to have to play very hard-nosed football. But is Washington really going to be the team that makes them do that on Sunday? I don't really know.
Moving on to the final Sunday game here. Big football night in America here, Sunday night football on NBC. It will be at Ford Field when the Detroit Lions host the Los Angeles Rams. It's a playoff matchup, repeat, just like to kick the weekend off. And I got to say, 3.5 points given to Detroit. I'm glad to see it, but it's not one that I'm really fired up to pick. Mostly because I don't like picking for my teams, but man, oh man, I will say I like Detroit 3.5 points over the Rams, but it's hard to know what this Rams team is going to look like. They've had a whole season or a whole off season to scheme in Puka Nakua into this. You know, Cooper Kupp is healthy. How is Stafford dealing with everything? I mean, Stafford continues to hold down his career, but man, injuries have certainly been an issue for him across his career. And I'm not saying that he's injured now, but how is he going to hold up for 17 more games is the big question that most people have on their mind. And I don't know. I'm not real fired up about this one. There's definitely weapons for the Rams, but their defense is certainly aged. And what's to be expected here?
Well, this is out of week one for the NFL. This is probably my second favorite matchup that we have this week. My first being Kansas City and Baltimore. But I really like this matchup. Like you said, we get the revenge match for the Rams trying to avenge last year's postseason loss to Detroit. This is at Ford Field, which we know, as if you were paying even a little bit of attention, Detroit was setting all sorts of new noise records with their crowd at home. I I think this will be a close game, but I can honestly see Detroit winning this by 7.
Interesting fact: the most expensive average ticket price in the NFL in 2024 is Ford Field in Detroit, followed by Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. So Detroit very hyped up right now. I like the home field advantage. I don't pick my teams. I picked my team last week and it didn't go well, and I'm not doing it again. I sometimes I'll pick against my team, so it either, one way or the other, I'm happy. As for the over under, I think they did a good job with this one. It could be a little
50 and a
higher.
half.
I lean toward the over more than the
I
under.
do as well. Yeah.
But on to the Monday night game to close out the week.
Ooh, boy. Just what
Unknown
everyone was
unknowns.
asking for.
We've got the NFC champion hosting an AFC East team that probably the biggest storyline is to see Aaron Rodgers' return, not only to the NFL, but to see his return to his home area in the Bay Area when the Jets take on the 49ers. They're given 3.5 points to the Jets. I'm going to shy completely away from this spread. The Jets.
Oh, absolutely.
The Jets are the only question here. 49ers, we know what they're going to be, we know what they are, but I would hate to pick this spread in favor of the 49ers only to find out that the Jets led by Aaron Rodgers are another, again, that dark horse team to really, and I guess they're less of a dark horse, they're more of a gray horse than a black horse that Washington would be, because we know that the Jets have. We just don't know what it looks like. We got to see it for 3 plays, and that was it. So, the Jets could easily come out here. They could be an incredible team, but they could also come out and be pretty mediocre. So, with that being
Oh,
said,
absolutely.
I'd probably stay away from it, and I'd also stay away from the over-under only because both of these teams are extremely high-rated defenses, but they're also, in theory, pretty dynamic offenses. I mean, the Jets have weapons. The Niners have 10 times the weapons. I mean, the Niners are just weapons. It's incredible. That Niners team, I really don't understand how they haven't won the Super Bowl with what they have. When you write it down on paper and you really look at it, you know, other than Brock Purdy, you know, it's hard to find a weak point on that team. Not to say that he's a weak point, but when he's the weakest piece of your offense, it's kind of incredible.
Yeah, it's a good team. I mean, they definitely put the Lions in their place in the NFC Championship last season.
In two quarters.
The 49ers absolutely should be one of the NFC's powerhouse teams. There's no doubt in my mind. I think probably the road to the Super Bowl through the NFC is going to be in San Francisco. Like, you're going to have to make your big games count against them. I would venture to say if I had to take the spread, I would cover with San Fran.
Yep.
The over under, I think that really depends on the Jets. Whichever
Yep.
Jets shows up, if Rodgers can make it through a full game, you could see a incredibly easy overtake this week. But if it's another game where Rodgers comes back and he didn't do enough, like Chance in the Tiki Hut beforehand, like San Fran could just run all over them and not let them score anything.
It could also, in the inverse, comes down to how people have been able to study Brock Purdy, because Purdy was not a known coming into last year. Obviously, he carried them through the playoffs the previous season, but the tape was limited. Now that he had a full season as a starting quarterback, are people starting to figure out his tendencies and stuff like that? And the Jets, a very competent defense. Maybe the Jets shut Brock Purdy down, and that could also lead to the under. But that being said, I've got a single pick to try and suss out here to make. I think I am going to take New Orleans minus 4.5 and kind of call it a day here. But just to review as we look everything over, I've got the under in Northwestern, 38.5 points, Duke Northwestern. I've got Pittsburgh plus 2.5 over Cincinnati. I've got the over 59.5 points in the Oklahoma State Arkansas game. I may think about that a little longer. I've got Iowa minus 2.5 over Iowa State. I've got Kentucky minus 9.5 over South Carolina. I've got Central Michigan minus 6.5 over FIU. I've got Wake Forest minus 2.5 over Virginia. I've got Tennessee minus 7.5 as a key pick against North Carolina State. I'm trying to remember where my other. Yes, the under 38.5 is a key pick. I've got New Orleans minus 4.5 over the Carolina Panthers. I've got Cincinnati Bengals minus 8.5 over New England as a key pick as well. The over 49.5 points, Jacksonville, Miami. And I've got the under 40.5 points, Las Vegas against the Chargers.
Definitely an interesting set of picks. I think you have some winners. I think there may be some that are a 50-50 split, but we shall see at the end of Monday night.
Yes, sir. So that just about does it here on episode 1. A little bit longer than we probably ever intended to go, but
3 hours, baby.
yeah, we're just finding our stride here. And hopefully next time around we'll be a little bit better, a little bit quicker on the verse. We'll be used to these teams, and we'll probably kind of weed down some of those college games. Certainly won't do the deep dive quite as much. Those NFL games flowed pretty good. So that'll just about do it here. I want to thank our sponsors. And nonetheless, happy football, everybody. And we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. See you next week.